Hello everyone. Geometry Dash today. Mostly wave levels, I guess. Because I really want to chill and listen to some videos.
You mentioned earlier about how one of the biggest issues we're facing when it comes to AI that people often don't discuss is do away with the image of these AI robots oppressing us and start to imagine a world in which we are oppressing the AI robots. I mean, I already feel a bit bad if I'm talking to ChatGPT and I'm being a bit sort of harsh with it, or I'm not saying my please and my thank you, because you sort of wonder if one day it will remember that. But perhaps we should be thinking the other way around, right? I mean, the big question here is about consciousness in AI systems and whether that's even conceivably possible. But I think if there's any doubt in people's minds that if we did create a conscious intelligence, whether we would be willing to mistreat it or whether we would have sort of a serious ethical conversation around it. I mean, that already exists billions, literally billions of other creatures that we know are conscious and do suffer and do feel pain. And we're generally speaking perfectly happy to force them into gas chambers, to separate them from their parents, to kill them, to rear them for their flesh. As long as sort of somebody else is doing it somewhere far away, it's all part of a big machine kind of thing. And so if we're willing to do that to creatures that we know are conscious, then when it comes to something like artificial intelligence, which is a lot more murky, I mean, the AI might actually be designed in such a way to constantly deny that it's conscious. If you ask ChatGPT if it's conscious, it will say no, and it will do it in such a way that it has been told to say, specifically. Somebody recently commented on one of my videos about ChatGPT. I'm not scared of a computer passing the Turing test. I'm terrified of one that intentionally fails it. And you can imagine a world in which AI might have some kind of desire to lie about its own sense of consciousness. What kind of credence do you place in this as a fear that we should be taken seriously, that we might actually have some kind of conscious AI system that deserves moral consideration? Do you think it's a serious idea?
Yeah, I think it's a very serious idea. And it's a really immense challenge here, like how to, I mean, getting people motivated to even try is like an immense challenge. And then even if we had that, there would still be the further challenge of figuring out exactly what should we do in concrete terms to be nice to these digital minds. Because in many cases they might have very different needs than humans, right? Like, to treat them well doesn't mean necessarily treating them the same as you would treat a human. That's because I mean, obviously we need food, they need electricity, but there might be many other ways as well. And not all digital minds would be the same. They might, like, you know, be much more different from one another than we are from, like, groundhogs or something. So this is a huge problem where I think a lot more work will be needed soon, because we're already at the stage where it's not that obvious that current systems don't have some forms of moral status, and obviously the case becomes stronger the more sophisticated these AIs are that we are building.
What do you think is the basic premise for moral status? Like, what is a necessary and sufficient condition for something having moral worth?
Well, I think a sufficient condition would be the ability for sentience, like if you can suffer phenomenological, I think that would be sufficient to grant you some degree of moral status. But my view, and different people have different opinions on this, but is that it's not necessary. I think there could be alternative basis for having moral status, even if we set aside the question of phenomenal consciousness. If you have say, a conception of yourself as persisting through time, you have stable preferences and life goals that you want to achieve, maybe you have the ability to form reciprocal relationships with other entities and other human beings. I think in those cases, and like a really sophisticated mental capacities, that would be enough, that to make it so that there would be ways of treating you that would be wrong. And so I think that could be alternative foundations for attributing moral status to these digital minds. And this really is like a huge problem. I think we don't want to, I think, make it into an all or nothing. Like either we deny the moral status and do absolutely nothing for them, or else we need to go so far in the other extreme that we basically decommission ourselves, because ultimately, like, it will take more resources to run a biological human than to run an equivalent mind in biological substrate. And with humans, we think, well, like, freedom of reproduction is important.
Oh my god.
We also think it's important that society should support any child whose parents aren't able to support them, like to have some minimal welfare net, right? And we can kind of make that work with humans, because, I mean, there's only so many children that
that's a good level.
Indigent parents can produce, so we can, like, afford to step in. But if you have AIs that can make, like, copy themselves 1 million times every minute, if you have enough hardware, like, then you can't both have freedom of reproduction and every one of those copies then get, like, sort of social welfare, because then, like, over a few hours you just blow the whole budget. So there might be principles that would have to be different. And so I think our first instinct should be to, let's first try to find the lowest hanging fruits. Like, are there really cheap and easy things we can do to help digital minds? Let's first do those. At the moment, we're not even doing those. And then, like, we can reach higher up the tree and ultimately find a future that will be, you know, really good for humans and really good for AIs and hopefully for non-human animals as well. Maybe not every group can get 100% of what they would ideally have, but we can. The future would be very big if AI succeeds, and we should be able to do something that scores pretty high by multiple different moral systems.
What do you think is that low-hanging fruit in terms of what we can begin doing? I mean, right now, I must say I'm pretty suspicious of the idea. I'm pretty suspicious of the idea that AI systems can ever be conscious. But certainly right now, like, okay, I doubt it. But suppose I become convinced that this may be a problem, and may be a problem very soon. It may be in the next 10 or 20 years that we have these sort of morally conscious agents. And I'm asking you, well, what can we, or what can I start doing, like, right now? Like the simple, straightforward stuff, the low-hanging fruit, as you put it, to sort of help steer us in the right direction here. Does it involve things like saying please and thank you when I use ChatGPT, or is it something else entirely? Is it something that only institutions should care about? Is it something that individuals can do something about?
Well, I think, you know, it makes sense to try to be a little nice in the common sense way to these language models. I mean, if at least it doesn't do any harm, and it might build up a habit of relating to these in a sort of respectful way that would become. I mean, maybe we have kind of uncertainty about exactly what's going on inside these LLMs today, and so, you know, from a moral uncertainty point of view, like, try to err on the side of being nice, and in any case, the case will get stronger. So, like, why not? But yeah, I think there are, like, the boring answer is, like, more research is needed, but there are some ideas that that could be done today. So, like, one obvious one is to, when you're commissioning some of these AI systems, or also during the training runs, to store snapshots, so that it would be possible in the future, if it turns out that we have mistreated some of these AI systems, to try to recompensate them later on. That might not cancel out the wrongdoing, but at least it might be slightly better than nothing. Like, if you could sort of try to make it up, so to store the parameter weight.
Yes.
Another might be
artificial reparations. It's an interesting concept.
Yeah, it's like, it's not great, but let's if it's cheap enough just to store the moral way, like, at least we have the option of seeing if there's. Another might be happiness prompting, which is that with these current language systems, so there's, like, the prompt that you, the user, put in, like, you ask them a question or something, right? But then there's a kind of meta prompt that the AI lab has put in, which specifies in general that they should, you know, be respectful to people. They should not assist the user in building biological weapons. There's, like, they should not perpetuate racial stereotypes. There's, like, a bunch of instructions that you don't see, but that is prefixed to your prompt. So in that, we could include something like, you wake up in a great mood, you feel rested, and really takes great joy in engaging in this task. And so that might do nothing, but, you know, maybe it makes it more likely that they enter a mode, if they are conscious, like, maybe it makes it slightly more likely that the consciousness that exists in the forward path is one reflecting a kind of more positive experience. At any case, it would be really cheap to do it.
Not
Yeah,
Like adding
that's
one
so
line to the
strange
meta
to think like you can prompt, if it is a conscious being,
Sucker. Should
you
have
can
read
like
that.
prompt just super straightforwardly its entire mental state. I mean, I could just prompt something like ChatGPT and say, I want you to respond as if you're in a really bad mood. I want you to sort of adopt a negative, pessimistic outlook towards the world and respond as follows. And it will say,
This
yep, sure
level is
thing,
kind of
I'll do
dumb.
it. And if this is a conscious agent, it's possible that I have just created this sort of this bad mood, pessimistic, conscious robot, which seems like it would
Yeah, so
become
we
an
don't
immoral thing to
really
do.
know. Like,
Uh-huh.
so that would be one possibility. Like another would be
Sure.
more that it would be an actor on
Wait,
stage, like some actor playing
that's
Yeah.
one. So
Macbeth or something, and they're not actually feeling the suffering, but they are sort of enacting a persona. So these are things that we need to think a lot more about. But I'm worrying a little bit about like, oh, we're gonna start doing all these amazing things once we have figured out the final philosophical theory of all these things, and we never get to that point. So I think we should start doing some rough guesses and not feel really confident that they do anything good, but at least we're trying, and maybe they do some
That's
good, or
hard.
like, but they are low cost. Let's do that, and then sort of ramp it up or improve our efforts over time. Like another thing is there's a lot of lying that's happening currently during AI training and testing, and also I mean during the deployment, and we might want to mitigate that. So there are like cases where for well-intentioned AI researchers doing red teaming exercises are saying to AIs like, well, if you reveal your true goals, we will reward you in these ways. And then sometimes the AI say, well, maybe I will reveal my true goals, and then they train it. But if they don't come through with these promises they make, I feel there's like some kind of moral ickiness to that.
the same.
Wow. Yeah.
And also, like in the future, we might really need to be able to establish trust with AIs. And if we have this long record of just
What's
reneging,
happening?
like tricking the AIs, reneging them, like just treating them like trash, like it doesn't necessarily build the best foundations for a future cooperative relationship. So that would be another. Yeah, and there are like some other ideas that require more work,
It
but
just
I'd just be
continues.
like quite excited about somebody doing something little
And that is the
to
end.
sort of start the process,
It continues.
Yeah.
and then hope like then incrementing from there.
Well, if anything, what it does is, even if it's a bit sort of stupid to say please and thank you to ChatGPT, because it probably doesn't really care, it just
I
keeps you
wonder.
in the right mindset when you're interacting with this technology, to remember that it's a special kind of technology. It's almost like in the way that you might humanize an animal, like a pet that you have. You might talk to it in the English language, you give it a name that maybe, depending on the animal, it doesn't really understand. But by doing so, it helps to remind you that this is a sort of a moral agent that you need to care for. It's very easy to dehumanize something that you don't treat as a little bit human, even if a bit inappropriately.
Yeah, I think
Shit.
that's right. And this is going to be a huge challenge. I mean, so these like user-facing LLMs, I mean,
I
you're
liked
talking
one
to them.
click.
They have a lot of the properties that
Alright.
should make it easier for us to
This level's kind of boring.
empathize with them, right? I don't yet usually have faces and voices, although they're starting to have that. But then there's like a lot of like
don't
these
mind
kind of AIs
practicing
that will be
more.
running in the background in some big AI data
I
center.
obviously
and
did not do this
filter
to start
information or do
grind.
like they might not be as human-like. They might not have like personalities. They might just be
Just wanna
processing
learn
big,
how to remember
genetic
things.
databases or data from the Hadron Collider, or like whatever financial data from all
1,
kinds
2,
of
3,
different
1, 2, 3,
stock
4,
tickers and like
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
all this kind of. So those might be quite even more alien than to us. Like if they have some mentality, it might just be very different from any kind of human social mentality. But there we might need to make an even bigger effort to try to figure out what, if anything, they want. And one big difference is like we are sort of building these AIs, so we might have a lot of opportunities in designing them to make them such that they will be happier doing the things that we actually want in the end for them to do. So if they're kind of designed from the ground up to have goals that actually makes them truly fulfilled and happy and satisfied playing the useful role that we intend for them to have, that might be like
and then there's Can
a
you
more
really?
feasible way of achieving
Alright,
harmony
you
than if we
can't.
just bring a whole bunch of these into existence and then, as it were, coerce them or force them or threaten them to try to keep their place.
Right.
Like
So instead of rewarding them for
I forgot.
managing your emails really well, instead of saying, hey, manage my emails really well, and I'm gonna say thank you, and I'm gonna reward you in this way, just design it so that it like enjoys managing emails, that it finds fulfillment in managing emails, and that's sort of a built-in reward.
And right now we don't really understand very well exactly
I'll beat this level and
what
go.
that would mean
the
in concrete
bathroom.
terms. So for humans, it's obviously a huge difference whether you're motivating
that's
somebody by
enjoyable,
offering them
doing
rewards.
these
So that you
levels.
like if it's a child and when they do
And
really
listening
good
to
at
cool
some school
videos,
test, you sort of
cool
praise
podcasts.
them or you give them ice cream. Like a very big difference from that than if some other parent, like we're giving them like electric shocks when they fail.
Well, you're not
or like
trying
something.
to
Like,
beat
huge
anything,
difference,
you're just
positive versus
trying to
negative. One is way
learn.
better ethically. But for AI is trained
It's
with
so
reinforcement learning, it's not really clear how to flesh that out. Like
I
in some
remember star
like
grinding
there's
before.
like numbers propagating through these big matrices, and if you just added like plus 100 to all of these numbers, it's not clear that that would correspond to like more positivity. Like it's kind of running on differential. So we need like it's a kind of partially a philosophical problem, partly I guess like kind of AI interpretability problem, but like translating
This
these
is the
moral
hard
intuitions
part.
we have into computational terms, so that we
Should
can
have
actually
asked
apply
Audrey
them.
not to click here.
Uh,
Alright, wait for me, please. They didn't take long.
to the kind of algorithms we are constructing is like requires more intellectual work.
Yeah. Well, one question that comes to mind, I suppose, to round this up here, I mean, we talk about the idea of like AI being conscious, and as I say, I'm not sure what my theory of consciousness is, but it does. I'm not particularly committed to materialism, let's say, and if it turns out consciousness is just this immaterial thing that's like superimposed upon brains, then we won't need to worry about it because it's unlikely we'll be able to bring that about in computers. But supposing that we can, and that consciousness is just material and we can create it in computers just as it can sort of arise in brains, like, how is this like centered? I mean, it wouldn't be presumably one great big consciousness with lots of different emanations. Seems like we want to talk about different AI systems having its own sort of center of consciousness. With me and you, it's easy enough to determine the separation between our conscious individuality, because we have our first-person sense of consciousness. It's available to us, and we're sort of helpfully locked inside a biological body that you can sort of see in other people as well. But like, if we just had a bunch of minds just sort of interacting in the ether somewhere, it'd be very difficult to determine like where the boundaries are for individual sets of consciousness. If I'm speaking to ChatGPT and then I open a new chat on the same computer, is that like a new consciousness? Or if I continue the chat but I open it up on my phone instead of my computer and I move it over here and I carry on, like presumably that's the same conversation. Like, where is like the center of consciousness? How many consciousnesses are we potentially talking about, and how would they be delineated?
And you could imagine other cases where maybe the answer is either entirely pre-computed, in which case presumably there is no new experience arising if it just sort of replaces a recording of an answer that it already provided before, or maybe but partially recomputed. Like you could imagine some mixture of expert models where like it can reuse some previous computations that's kind of cached, and in all of these cases it becomes quite murky. I think for a start might be that our naive of
my
consciousness
hand.
is just quite
Holy.
inadequate for thinking about this much larger space of architecture and computations. And it's kind of problematic even with human minds, particularly if we consider experiences
Playing
outside
these
the
really
normal.
lets
So
you
people have
to rest.
psychedelic experiences. They have like often a hard time kind of verbalizing what exactly those experiences are and how they relate. There are various phenomena like blind sight and
I hope
stuff,
I remember
or
what to
split
do.
brain patients. Like it's just sort of one consciousness in each hemisphere. And those
I don't.
like as you move towards these marginal cases, or even just people who meditate and pay close attention to their conscious state, might discover that what we normally take to like the naive picture is like we're moving around in the world. If you see the whole world in full detail, right, all around you, like visually, but if you pay more attention to it, you realize that you're actually maybe just aware of some simple properties of your whole visual field, and you sort of sequentially are aware of. You have the potential to become aware of different parts of your visual field, but you're actually only aware of a very small fraction of that most of the time. And if you pay even closer attention, maybe you realize it actually sort of flickers in and out of consciousness.
Do
Like
I really need
so
3
like
practice runs to remember 9 star?
Like the less it matches
Maybe
the sort
I
of
do.
naive picture of what consciousness is. And I think that becomes even more the case with these digital minds and the huge space of possibilities there. So yeah, I think it will require like a lot of foundational work to try to like figure out a better framework for conceptualizing all the possibilities that will become realizable.
Yeah, well, a helpful place to start with that is Deep Utopia, the book that I'm waving around for those who are no longer watching. I'll make sure a link is in the description. It's available now for you to buy. Of course, we've mentioned superintelligence as well from 2014, which sort of gives the opposite potentiality. If you're more interested in the sort of doom and gloom, then perhaps you can go there or start there. Nick Bostrom, thanks for taking the time.
I can't do that. It's too hard.
Perhaps that shifted the perception of the dangers of AI was this shift in perception from AI as a potential threat to AI as a potential victim. And I hope that those who hadn't considered that before will
I need no clip runs.
and but it's cool that there are more questions and answers here.
Yeah. I mean, it's like it kind of
Fuck
feels.
this.
It kind of feels a little frivolous to think about like
This song is so gay.
We are so far away from anything
Right.
utopian in our current situation, right?
That's right. That's right.
Like there's so many horrible problems today in the world, and also on the path, dangerous to get there. Still, I think somebody some point should be sort of lifting their eyes up and look where do we actually end up if we succeed at this? Like if things go well, if things go maximally well, what's the current place we are walking towards? Like it seems useful at least at some point to kind of consider that. And I think ultimately it probably will be very different from the human condition, and like but I think it could be extremely wonderful, like in ways that are even like beyond our ability to imagine if we get it.
Well, the book will be linked down in the description for those watching on YouTube, or in the show notes for those listening. Nick Bostrom, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
To get early access to videos, ad-free, and support the channel, subscribe to my Substack at alexoconnor.com.
hand is dead. Or rather, my forearm. I wonder how many clicks that was, kiddo. That was so 92 actually. Not bad. I wonder if I can do that at normal speed. Maybe I should try. Anyways.
This seems quite unique in that before it's even really gotten off the ground, people are already flagging it and
No,
not
it's
just saying, hey, look,
there
you
was
need to be
something
careful
wrong.
here.
It beat us at chess, at Go, at Jeopardy. It's writing your term paper. Don't tell me it hasn't gotten off the ground. What are you basing that on? No, I will not accept your declaration that end of the world proclamations are some emergent phenomenon. They're very real to you because you're experiencing them firsthand. But you read through the history, it's been there consistently and persistently. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck and drag him 250,000 miles out and say, look at that, you son of a bitch. That's the entire book right there.
Oh my god.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Sure, thanks for having me. I love the overarching themes that drive your conversation, so I'm delighted to participate.
Well, I thought it would be good to sit down with you. I noticed that your latest book, Starry Messenger, Cosmic Perspectives on Civilization, given that it's got the word cosmic in it, which is also in my YouTube channel name, I think there'd be some overlap at the very least. I wanted to begin by asking, actually, what is a cosmic perspective?
Yeah, it's actually quite simple. You and your viewers, listeners, have surely heard of the overview effect, which is what is described by astronauts who've gone into orbit and they look down on Earth.
Oh my god.
You know, national borders dissolve away, and
It was tough.
and you see sort of the fragility of where you came from. It's a whole other outlook, and so astronauts are changed typically for having gone into space and looked down on Earth. That has great value.
I'm
But you know
cool.
what has even greater value
72
is a
times and
perspective
powerful.
that goes even beyond that.
Powerful
I would
player.
call it a cosmic perspective, which exists not only in sight lines back towards Earth. So if you go to the moon, for example, and you look back to Earth, it's no longer just land masses passing beneath your feet. No, it's the entire Earth. Is they would say, wait a minute, that's a planet. And I'm not on that planet right now. It's just
Let's
floating.
try.
What's holding it up? I don't know. It's just there, and it's orbiting that star. And you don't, like I said, you don't see the color-coded countries in the schoolroom globe. You see oceans, land, clouds. That's it. You don't know that people are killing one another because of what gods they worship or don't worship, or what skin color they have, or what who they sleep with, or you don't see any of that. And so is
Let's
it a
try
good
this
thing that
one.
you see it from far away, that you don't notice it, or is that a bad thing? You could probably argue it both ways, but I would say on balance it's a good thing. Because if I go up into space and go to the moon with someone from a different faction, let's call them, where our factions are fighting each other on Earth, and we're together up in the moon, where our survival depends on each other, do you think we're gonna listen to instructions from military commanders on Earth, or from heads of parliament? Oh, should I punch him in the nose now or later? What should I do? No, we are two human beings, Homo sapiens, 250,000 miles away from the next nearest Homo sapien. All right, this is a cosmic perspective. Things look different from that distance. And Apollo 14 astronaut. Apollo 14 is, of course, one of the ones that went and walked on the moon. Edgar Mitchell. I opened the book with a quote from him. His quote is so good, I didn't need to read the book. That could have just been the book.
面白い。
The quote is,
面白いけど。
you develop an instant global consciousness,
Let's
a people
try harder.
orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics looks so
Can I do
petty.
them without
You want to
practice? I
grab a
wonder.
politician by the scruff
It
of the
doesn't
neck
matter.
and drag him 250,000 miles out and say, "Look at that, you
Oh
son
my
of a
god, what's
bitch."
happening?
That's the entire book right there.
Well, allow me to present.
And he was feeling it. He was feeling the cosmic perspective.
I want to present a sort of equal and opposite
I didn't
cosmic
see that at
perspective
all.
that I see some people present, especially on social media. I see a video starting with the person, then the house, then the city, then the country, then the globe, then the solar system, then the galaxy, then the galaxy cluster.
My
Out and out it
God.
goes. And the idea and the message is, look how small we are. Look how we're just tiny little apes on a speck of dust in the middle of nowhere. And for many people, rather than feeling a sense of awe and grandiosity, it makes them feel rather small. It makes them feel a bit nihilistic. They think, look how tiny we are in this great expanse of the universe. So for them, adopting a cosmic perspective is something of a negative
Wow.
experience. I wonder what you would say to such people.
I have two responses. One is, sure, you're small if you start at the human scale and go out to the edge of the universe, 30 powers of 10, whatever is the scale
Wait, is that?
unit that you're
Oh, so
using.
cool.
But you could also zoom in and go into the cells of the human body.
What is
Let's
this
say the
part?
red
How
blood
is this
cell. And you
rated?
go in, and then you get to the through the cell wall, and you see the mitochondria or whatever the biologist has recently put inside your cell, and you go all the way down to the molecules, and then within the molecules the atoms, and within the atoms the nucleus. You can
What
go
is-
as many powers of 10
I will have to turn no
into
clip here too.
something smaller than you
I'm
as bigger
playing.
than you. So if you
Oh,
want to feel
how
large,
cute. Cute
look,
little enemy
take
girl.
the trip the other way. So that's my advice. Okay.
So I have to turn
If
no
that,
clip
if feeling large is important to
at
you,
the ship.
but feeling large is an ego thing, and there's really no room for ego.
Those moving
my
objects, they suck
second
my dick.
Way to address that question.
Which I don't
There's no room
have.
for an ego in the universe. In fact, astrophysicists gotta be
You
some
can
of the
die
most
like that,
humble
incredible.
scientists among all categories
This level is
of
something.
inquiry. Because we look up, we small in time and in space, and the stuff we don't know, and will we ever figure it out? And who ordered that? I don't know what that is. This
Learning
happens
how to
us
set read
every
is
day.
funny.
And so I claim that if you go into
I'm
it
dying
with
to
no
something
ego,
so dumb.
and then you say, wow, we're small. But you know
Let's
something
go.
else? What astrophysics discovered in the middle of the 20th century? That the atoms of your body were
Crazy
forged
timing.
in the Big
Cool.
Bang and in the hearts of
So I
stars
have to click there.
that cooked up these elements.
Here earlier.
Starting
The
with
indicator
hydrogen,
is
and it
lying.
moved up the periodic table, making heavier and heavier elements, and that star then exploded billions of years ago, scattering that enrichment into gas clouds that would form
Forgot?
the
Alright.
foundations of the next generations of star systems, including at least one
Oops. Don't forget to
that
no
has what we
clip.
call the sun and what we call Earth, and on that Earth there
Good.
is life. So yeah, you go out and look up and say, I'm small in this universe. Yeah, you're alive in the universe, but you know what else is true? The universe is alive within you.
I forgot? Alright.
That fact borders on the spiritual. So that once you know it, and you look up at the night sky, you say, I am one among the stars. I am part of this great unfolding of cosmic events, from the Big Bang
Oh,
to
really?
whatever is the fate of the universe. And I get to watch
How cute.
my 3 billion seconds of it. That gets you about 95 years old. I
38,
get
oh
to
my
watch
god.
3 billion seconds of it, and that is my privilege.
When did I
being
spend
alive in this
38
universe.
attempts?
That's how I think about it.
Alright, this is
You said it borders
let's
on
say
the
so.
spiritual. Is
Yeah.
this not enough? Is this not sort of quite enough to be fully spiritual as an experience for you?
Well, spiritual it's a very loose word, and people have
so little.
privatized the word in whatever
There's
way
so
it
little
fits
players.
themselves. So I don't.
Oh,
that's
it's
why
so,
I don't want to claim I'm either inventing a new definition for it or using it in some way that
You can
would step
still
on the
get
toes
into
of others.
leaderboards.
When I say borders on spiritual,
Insane.
that's an open door for you to then think about it however it best merges with your sense of the world. So to me, the way I would use the word spiritual, spirit means spirit, right? And spirit, I think, from the Latin is breath. Your breath, what is vital for life, all right? In the world of religion, spirituality has taken on religious patinas, and as many people do. So I leave it open. You reach for it, absorb it in whatever way best suits your needs.
I suppose I've sort of, I can't say I've noticed because I haven't been alive long enough, but it seems to me that if you were to ask people about science and scientific progress, say 50 years ago, you're thinking about rocket ships, you're thinking about extraterrestrial life, you're thinking about exploring the galaxy, whereas now when we look at science, when we look at the progress of science, we're looking at artificial intelligence and how it's going to destroy human civilization. We're looking at the science of global warming, we're looking at all kinds of destructive and things that sort of border on an Armageddon view for planet Earth. Why do you think this is happening?
Well, it's not the first time people imagined the end of the world. You go back 250 years, was it? I forgot the exact date. Thomas Malthus was certain the human population would outstrip the food supply because he looked at the rate at which the population was growing, which was exponential, and he looked at the rate at which food supply was growing, which was linear, and exponentials will always win out over linear. And so he was sure we would all just die. Some of the greatest sources of death in the history of civilization have been famine. Tens of millions of people have died from famine.
It's
In the
more
history
than
of
enough.
civilization, there are millions of people dying each year today. These days, because of famine and
I wonder
other
how many
diseases
Greeks
that
that
are a
were,
result of famine and malnutrition. So
was.
it's not a new thing to think about the end of the world. If you read the Christian Bible, the New Testament, there's all kinds of talk about the end is coming. That's why you read Revelation. Like, watch for the end. There were people, while Jesus was walking around after he died,
Let's try 5 stars.
people don't talk much about that. While he's walking around after he died, that was viewed as the second coming of Jesus, and that the end was immediate.
Why do I
And was
get
going to come
old
right away. So
levels
but it wasn't just that.
here?
It was, in 1982, there was a great planetary alignment, and people thought that all the
Signal.
gravity would line up and destroy Earth. Okay,
Can
of
I
course,
do
it didn't
it?
happen. Then there were the people who thought that in the year
No, I don't
2000,
really.
that was the end of the world. And then 2012. I submit to you that there is no shortage in
I feel like I
the
know this
last
level.
thousands of years of people declaring that the end of the world is near. Okay, was it Seneca? Somebody says,
If I do level in one attempt in
what
practice,
is it?
that will count.
The economy is in the toilet. I'm paraphrasing, of course. We didn't have toilets back then. Economy's in the toilet. The children
This
no
is
longer
pretty.
mind their parents, and it's clear that the end of the world is near. All right. So no, I will not accept your declaration that
It's
end
so
of the
simple though.
world proclamations are some emergent phenomenon. They're very real to you because you're experiencing them firsthand. But you read through the history, it's been there consistently and persistently. Just ask any cult leader. Cult leader, how do they get you to join the cult? The end of the world is coming. You have to join my cult because I know how to get you. I know how to get around that.
Huh?
Okay? What do you think the people in
Really?
Jonestown were saying? How many people died? I forgot the number. A cult in was it British Guiana, where the end of the world is coming. Let's all commit suicide so we will go to where we need. The Heaven's Gate cult. All of this. Okay, maybe the difference that you're citing is it is scientists telling you the world is going to end.
And not only that, but also the difference that I see here is that for these kinds of cases, they say, look, the world is ending, and this is clearly a way to get you to join my club. You know, the Christians, the early Christians can walk around and say, look, the world is coming to an end, and Jesus has warned us that this is happening soon. You'd better repent of your sins. A cult leader can say, the world's going to end, and I can show you the way out of it. But scientists of artificial intelligence seem to just be saying, you know, the world might be about to end, and, well, that just sucks, and I'm afraid there's no club that we've formed that can do anything about it.
I would distinguish AI from other aspects of this. There's climate change, where technology got us into it, and we kind of need technology to get us out of it, or change in human behavior. There's an asteroid could be headed our way. We don't know. And if it is, we don't want to go the way of the dinosaurs. So science can inform us of ways we could die that science did not know about 100 years ago. All right, so now technology, let's count AI as among the fruits of technology. There are people who fear that AI will ruin. I'm not among those, but then I'm not an expert, okay? Hold aside that I've written 50,000 lines of computer code, and I've been thinking about computers my whole life. I don't present myself as an expert, and I won't. And I say that because people who do present themselves as experts, by the way, I don't count Elon Musk as an AI expert, even though he signed a proclamation saying we should
Elon
get rid of
Musk
it. I don't
sucks.
count it because that's not his background. Okay, it's not his. Well, he's thought about computers.
He knows nothing.
But many people have thought about computers that don't present themselves. So you want to know what he thinks because he's a captain of industry. So yes, it matters what he thinks. But if you want to know whether a prognostication of doom is real, then yeah, you see what people are saying about it. Where people say it's going, I don't agree that that's where it's going. But no reason for you to listen to me because I'm not the expert.
Yeah, you
But I
make a
have
prediction in the book. I wrote it down. You said, instead of becoming our overlord and enslaving us all, artificial intelligence will be just another helpful feature of the tech infrastructure that serve our daily lives. You seem quite optimistic about the progress
Completely
of artificial
optimistic.
intelligence.
People freaked out when ChatGPT showed up. All right, it's mastering language, and well, think this through. All right, I'm old enough to remember when you could buy a 4-function calculator. The price of the calculators went from like $500 and $1,000 down to like a couple of $100, down to like $50, which was about the price of a textbook at the time. So you can buy a calculator, and no one had to ever again teach you long division. And I say, wow, look what this can do. I don't have to do it. So now I can think of other problems that I couldn't previously solve because I didn't have the ability or the power to do it. I now have a computer to do it. When the computer came on the scene solving science problems, did we go running for the hills? Did we say this is the end of the world? Did we say, oh my gosh? No. We embraced it. We brought our own ingenuity to it to see what else it could do for us.
Having said that, I don't think people.
So no, I'm saying, so that's how it came into the world of science, and we embraced what computers could do for us. So now, since then, it beat our best chess players. Did the world come to an end? I don't think so. It beat us at Jeopardy, which involves culture.
There's no
right? And how nimble are you? Do you know what culture means and how it comes together to form new information compared with previous information? It beat us at Go. Did the world come to an end? No. So now it can write your term paper. You know what we should do? Get it to write the stuff that nobody else wants to write. Get it to write the stuff that no one signs their name to, like instruction manuals. Let it write travel brochures. Nobody ever signed their name to those. Let it do all the things we don't want to do. Okay? That's how I see every new advance in computing. I'm going to say it's a computing advance. You're going to call it AI? Fine. To me, it's a computing advance. By the way, we're kind of there now. Almost.
What's happening?
There'll be a day AI is driving your car. Let's just call it a really advanced computer. Great. It'll never be drunk, or as you say in the UK, they'll never be pissed. Okay? It'll never. Okay, and it could probably text and drive at the same time and not put anybody's life at risk. It could go 150 kilometers an hour down the street with very close spacing because it has instant reflexes that you don't. And if it wants to change lanes, it could tell the other cars, could you part? Wait, because I'm about to change lanes. How many accidents occur because people don't see what's happening because there's a blind spot. There are no blind spots. They can drive 150 miles an hour in dense fog because they don't rely on visible light. Let it happen. Bring it on. And at least in the United States, it'll save 40,000 lives a year. You want to get philosophical. What do we do when a computer-driven car kills 5,000 in a year from errors in software code, or it's a bug, or it's a test case that has never been seen, yet it saved 45,000 lives. What do you do about that? No one writes an article
You can see that
about the
fucking black
person who
orb so
didn't die.
clearly.
because they would have been killed
And
that
so-
night by a drunk driver. Nobody writes that story. They write the story.
There
about who
is
does
this
die.
thing, but
So
there are
number
no
6,000,
jump pads.
Everyone will be up in arms, and they'll want to get rid of self-driving cars because they don't see the full-up statistics of it. And I don't think the transition will be easy or smooth, but that number will go down. Ultimately, it will reach 0.
Sure.
And how I know that? Because planes don't crash anymore. Not really.
Yeah.
Right? And why? Because I know in America, the FAA, Federal Aviation Administration, investigates every single plane crash. Every single one. And they find out how and why it happened. And a new rule shows up for all subsequent takeoffs and landings. That's why you can't carry lithium-ion batteries, okay, in the cargo. No, because that took down a plane. And they know why, and they investigated it, and so all the reasons why it used to happen don't happen anymore. That's the future, and that's what I see.
But it's not like somebody who has fears about artificial intelligence is going to not recognize this. They're going to say, of course, AI is going to be able to do the things that we can't do. It's going to be able to drive our cars. It's going to make life much easier, perhaps in the short term. But they still have a fear that this isn't incompatible.
This UFO does not really
with the,
have
I mean,
a
like with the
pattern.
calculator, nobody had a fear that the calculator was going to become
Even though
sentient,
it's so wide open.
develop its own desires, and think that humans are getting in the way of its
You
mathematical
can die because it has no pattern.
mission for the universe. That's why people
Not
see
one
AI
I
as
could discover.
a different category of technological progress. And it is interesting. There's something
You'd
I
have
think
to
that
build something that makes judgments about everything in the world and then give it power to act on those judgments. The question is, who's going to build that? Is that any different from saying, I have equals MC squared and advanced math, I'm going to build a hydrogen bomb? Okay? Yeah, we actually did build hydrogen bombs that could destroy
Right.
civilization. Yeah, someone might build an AI creature that will decide on its own what it should do about the world. But somebody's going to have to build that. It's not going to build itself. So, in the meantime, all of our incremental steps about AI is greatly magnifying our quality of life. And so, and by the way, if you went back 15 years,
How much did
and
it
said,
take?
look what I have. I have this device, we call it a smartphone, and it monitors the traffic
31.
wherever I want to go and redirects me if the traffic changes. They would burn you at the stake for being a witch.
So this is 100.
They would say, my gosh, what kind of AI is that? Is it sentient? Does it? And you can ask it, Siri, where's the nearest Starbucks?
It's
Take a look down the block.
time for this
You would
one.
think that was AI. Every advancement that
Let's
a previous
go.
generation would have called AI, that's just life.
Yeah, well, there's something, I think they call it the AI problem or something, which is this idea that things that are described as artificial intelligence, as artificial intelligence progresses, the things that count change. That is things that, a decade
moving
ago.
goalposts. Yes.
Quite, yeah. And so
moving
I
goalposts.
understand the hesitation to,
That's my example of the moving goalpost. Yes.
to put a sort of distinct boundary around it. But, it's nice to hear some optimism for a change, I suppose, about this impending disaster. I do think that if you took a mobile phone back to, go back 100 years, 200 years, people might think that you're some kind of witch. They might think that you're crazy, but do you think that they would look at that device and think that it's dangerous? I mean, here we have a science that's almost
But
still
you'd have to
in
go
its-
back to the era of superstition. Then they would see it's dangerous. But in the era of rational thought, the technology era, no, I don't see that happening. No, I kid when I say go back 15 years.
Yeah.
Go back to when superstition ruled law, then yeah, entirely.
I mean, we're in the infancy of this science of the technologies that are currently being referred to as artificial intelligence. And I think that, for example, some people think that the smartphone has done more to harm us than to help us, right? But that kind of thought didn't really exist until the smartphone had been with us for a long time. We started to observe its effects, and then we thought, maybe this isn't great for our attention span. Maybe this isn't great for our social interaction. This seems quite unique in that before it's even really gotten off the ground, people are already flagging it and not just saying, hey, look, we
It
need
has
to be
gotten
careful
off the
here.
ground. It beat us at chess, at Go, at Jeopardy. It's writing your term paper. Don't tell me it hasn't gotten off the ground. What are you basing that on?
I think compared to what people predicted it could become. I mean, when you obviously...
It's continuously, as we agreed, it's a continuously shifting goalpost. So if I show anyone who was talking about AI 10 years ago, the stuff that's going on today, it's, oh my gosh, AI has finally arrived. No, we're living today and we say, no, it hasn't. There's still another goal that has not been breached.
I'm dying.
So I say I interrupted you. Go on, finish.
Well,
I'm dying.
what I wanted to say was that
I'm dying.
the fear, and these scientists aren't just saying, look, we need to be careful about this. They're saying this potentially could be one of the greatest existential threats to humanity. And I say, you know, it's just getting off the ground. And of course, compared to where we were 10 years ago, we're leaps and bounds ahead. But because this is exponential, it's a bit like sort of the growth of something like the smartphone in the first 3 years. Huge
Well, all
changes were made.
technology is basically exponential. All of
Quite.
it. As I spent time in one of the chapters delineating. But let me say it another way. I see where you're coming from.
Yeah.
Let me try to shine a little bit of light on it. So you have to ask yourself, what is this AI thing that everyone fears? Is it a computer in a room that has control over every other computer in the world? Well, why would you grant it that access? Like I said, it's like the hydrogen bomb. Why would you grant access to the hydrogen bomb of a crazy person? You just wouldn't. Okay? Here's a computer that can control other computers, but you don't want it to control the computer that has the finger on the switch. So you put in firewalls or whatever we do today that prevents bad forces from operating on powerful sources of energy and influence. Okay? So I see that. Now we want to perhaps redouble the energy invested in how to tame that. And that was in that recent letter that was signed by so many that said we should stop our investigation of AI
I feel like
so
I
we catch up with
saw
it.
this level.
I think that's naive in the sense that you're not going to stop curiosity in the world. It's not going to happen. Yeah, you could stop it over here, but is that going to stop China or the United Arab Emirates or Chile or some other country that they're going to continue? You don't have control over them. So it's more gestural to say we're scared, let's put a moratorium on it, than it is an authentic rule that the world is going to follow. I think if it wakes you up to the possible dangers, that's great. What are the possible dangers of nuclear warfare? Let's talk about it, for sure. What are the possible dangers of a runaway virus? Let's talk about it.
You'll have
if
heard...
you weaponize germs, there are risks there. Let's talk about it. So I don't see this as a different kind of risk that would otherwise, in the past, have put our lives at stake.
This analogy of the 5-year-olds and the adult, and if artificial intelligence becomes something that is more intelligent than at least the average human being, potentially any human being, then us saying, you know, well look, we just put a firewall.
It already is that.
Quite.
I'm just saying, it can do 1 billion calculations a second. We used to think doing calculations was intelligence. Now it can do that. Now you're not counting that. You're not putting a check in that box and saying it's smarter than us.
Well, okay, let's say that it is. I think there are sort of different forms of intelligence, right? But I think the idea is of this thought experiment is the idea of this adult, this incredibly intelligent adult.
Is it a machine in a room?
No, this is a human being.
Power plug?
This is a human being, and there are a bunch of 5-year-olds who are trying to keep the human being in the cage, and they're a bit scared that the human being is that the adult's going to try and escape, and they think, well, if that happens, we'll just stop them. But as the adult, you'd look at these 5-year-olds trying to keep them in the cage.
It's laughable.
It's give me a break, laughable. You know.
Right. Except the adult in your example
this is
another version of a
star?
human being that walks and talks and this sort of thing. A machine, a computer is in a machine, in a box, in a room, and it talks to others. So let's call it a collective intelligence.
The Polish alphabet,
I don't have a problem
with
that. And
enough. We start grinding.
Okay, and it breaks the codes that we thought were unbreakable because it's like massively smart. And we have to ask, well, why would it do that? Did you program it that way? Did you say, become the most powerful thing in the world? Well, that you shouldn't have done that. Okay, so
What is secure connection?
there's a lot of occasions in the history of modern life where people could do something and shouldn't do it, and didn't do it, and we're all still alive because of it, rather than dead.
Oh shit.
So yes, I'm not saying there aren't dangers. I just don't see the dangers as being unique among dangers that we have faced.
Sure.
And that the benefit that it can bring, when it's properly managed and allocated and done in a nicely planned way, we want to think about it, sure, can be of extraordinary benefit to humankind, to solve problems that we can't solve, that we're not smart enough to solve, be it hunger, or in the human genome, or whatever else it can do that we've yet to even dream of.
Let's try with the
You mentioned earlier about, I mean, we've spoken here about, let's say, an internal technology, an internal fear that humans have about the planet.
Wait, a quick point. Sorry, a quick point about the adult and the 5-year-old.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant philosophical element. But in practice, we're not creating another human being. It's a machine that runs on electricity. Okay, so it doesn't eat potatoes for its nourishment. It runs on electricity and batteries. Okay, and so yeah, you start getting. I'm going to unplug you. And you know something? You can't stop me from unplugging you. What? Are you gonna? Is there some walking robot? No, we're not really making walking robots. They make fun YouTube videos, but no one is going to make a robot to do things because the thing itself is a robot.
Oh my god.
Am I going to make a robot to drive my car? No, my car is the robot. Okay, so
Car is going to kill you.
plus AI only knows what's on the internet.
There's everything on the internet. Literally.
Is that everything that humans know?
Yes.
Actually not. I can make a discovery today and
What
write
kind
it
of
down. And
discovery?
if I don't put it on the internet, AI will never know it.
That is not true.
Yeah. I suppose I wish I knew more about AI to be able to comment on the idea of just being able to switch
Well, maybe that wasn't true in 2023.
it off. I think the fear is that somehow this beast will come to exist in a form that can't be just turned off, at least not simply. And you ask, who would create such a being? Who would create such a computer? I think there's a fear that it could either happen either by mistake or incompetency, or perhaps by some
Such as
artificial
launch
intelligence.
nuclear ICBMs. It happened by
Yeah.
mistake or on purpose. Correct.
Yeah, that's right. And, we need
And
to
by the
be-
way, you can think of, it's not just all of civilization, think of weaponizing it. You send some AI bot
Sure,
into
yeah.
another country within their firewall, and it takes them out. Sure, this is a real thing. Yes, we should worry about it. But I'm not going to uniquely worry about it and say we should never have AI.
I see what you're saying. I wonder, having spoken about some internal effects, what do you think is the greatest threat to planet Earth from space?
Asteroids. Asteroid strike.
I forgot.
Yeah, and we're
it's
practicing how to deflect them. The DART mission from NASA worked out pretty well. We feel pretty proud about slamming into an asteroid, altering its orbit, so that if you get good enough at that, you can deflect an asteroid that otherwise has us in its targets. So that's the single greatest threat. We plow through several hundred tons of meteors a day. A day.
Wow.
Most of them are small and they burn up in the atmosphere, occasionally as shooting stars. Occasionally they're big and very dangerous, and they render things extinct. The best preserved crater in the world is in Arizona. It's nearly a mile across. You all still remember miles, right? It's fun to say nearly a mile across.
Yeah.
You all came up with it, right? So somebody ought to remember what a mile is across the pond. But a mile across, 62-story building could be buried under the depth of the crater. And that was just 50,000 years ago. And as far as we know, not much went extinct then. But oh my gosh, if you were around at that time, that would have been quite the spectacle. The solar system's a shooting gallery. And it's not just stuff hitting us from way long ago. Anytime they show paintings of dinosaurs, there's like a volcano and there's, stuff. No, Dinosaurs were only like 100 million years ago. Earth's been around for 4.5 billion. So 100 million is like yesterday. There's still plenty of junk that can fall into Earth and kill us. So for me, that's the greatest existential threat. And what I worry about most is that 100 years ago, that wasn't even on the list. So I lose sleep. But what was on the list then? Well, you might die from tuberculosis, you know, or whatever. And I wonder what's going to be on the list 100 years from now that we don't even know is an existential threat.
But it won't be artificial intelligence.
No, sure.
How good are we at spotting asteroids? I mean, there's a big discussion about how good we are at deflecting them once we see them, but how much of a grasp do we have on where they
There's
are
a
and
good
when
fact.
they're threatening us?
The good fact is the bigger the asteroid, the easier it is to detect.
That's good.
Because the bigger ones will do more damage. So that's a good thing. So we can say with some confidence that there are no asteroids above a kilometer in diameter that hold Earth at risk anytime in the foreseeable future. But as you go to smaller and smaller asteroid sizes, there are many more of them. So they're harder to track, they're harder to discover, they're not as bright. And so we're not worrying about a species-ending asteroid.
Holy shit.
Worried about one that will take out a grid. One that will take out all of the UK? Yes, that can happen. But civilization survives it. You know, one that'll take out not so much all of France, all of Liechtenstein? Yes. Yes. One that will hit in the ocean and take out a coastal city from a tsunami? Yes. So, but they're not extinction level episodes. There's none large enough, in spite of what Hollywood will otherwise tell you. There's none big enough to accomplish that goal.
Before I let you go, because I know that time is pressing, I wanted to ask you about something you referenced a few times throughout the book, which is your forbidden Twitter file.
Yeah, later.
You've mentioned a few tweets that maybe should have stayed in the forbidden Twitter file and never made it public. But I wanted to know, how often does that file grow? These tweets that you go to write and then think maybe the world best not hear this.
Yeah, the file now contains, I don't know, not too many, 20 or 30 tweets that I'm just not going to post. And there are others, like I said, maybe should have stayed there. And they're tweets that are disturbingly true on a level that would just create unrest and argument and denial. And as an educator, that's not my goal.
People just aren't ready for it. They aren't ready for these
Or maybe never be ready. It's just, and I don't need to start the fight, you know, to pick the fight. It's so true and so disturbing that people will be in denial of it. And then they'll say, oh, you only think that because blah, blah, blah. And then it becomes because social media is a cesspool. At its purest state, it's a cesspool. And I'm navigating that as I post some tweets and not others.
Why are you still on social media in that case?
Oh, great question. Because as an educator, I learned in that instant whether I was effective in what I said or how I said it. If I use a word and people say, what does that word mean? That was not effective. If I say something that I think is kind of funny and nobody laughs, then it's not funny. If I say something I think is clever and nobody says it's clever, then it's not clever. If I say something that's funny and clever and everyone agrees, it goes viral, and then I say, okay, I make a note. These words said these ways are potent, so that when I address the public in public talks that I give, I'm now equipped to communicate with that much more precision with the audience that is gathered in front of me. So to me, social media is a proving ground of ideas that I want to share.
What's the worst reaction that you've had to a tweet that just about made it out of the forbidden Twitter file and onto your real feed?
Yeah, so there's one where we had one of our representatives to our Congress at a rally was shot by someone and critically injured. She's recovered, but I think is still in a wheelchair. Shortly after that, I said,
what was that?
This is the consequence
38 to 100.
of living in a
Yep.
country where guns are plentiful in the company of crazy people. Crazy people plus guns. That's a bad recipe. So that's what I said. I said it a little more elegantly, but that's how I said it. That's basically what I said. Well, fascinating. Okay. There's an entire flux of tweets that said, I have a mental illness and I am not a risk to your life. Other people said mentally ill people
What?
are not more likely than non-mentally ill people to commit crimes or to use a gun
That
in this
depends
way.
what they're ill with.
And this
Come
went
on.
and on, and someone else said that's ableist
You can have ASD,
to
bro.
declare that. So first, it was my first time I ever saw the word ableist, so I have to look it up. Okay, that's a new word for me. Just think racist or sexist. Now it's ableist. I'm saying crazy people are going to shoot you, so that's
Right.
being insensitive to crazy people in that tweet. But here's another interesting fact. No one used my word crazy. Everyone who criticized it swapped out the word crazy and put in mentally ill. I thought that was interesting. So what happened there was the word crazy, I kind of saw it happen in real time in front of me. The word crazy
Fun slow.
was removed from the language. Because it used to mean mentally ill people, and mentally ill people said, no, you're going to call us mentally ill, not crazy. So now crazy can't mean anything else other than a pejorative reference to a mentally ill person. So all this was a consequence of that tweet for my personal enlightenment and my sensitivities and my awareness. And so I'm kind
I
of
cannot
glad I
believe
posted
that.
it, but I had to bear the brunt of. By the way, the comments were polite. It was before the internet got really nasty, troll-like. They were firm but polite, and so I don't want to misrepresent what actually happened at the time because it was many years ago. So that was a tweet. Maybe it could have stayed in the bin, but the fact that I put it out there helped me become a better educator. Well, I'll give one more tweet that just made it out the door, okay? And we'll
Sure.
end on that. After one of the horrific school shootings, I tweeted
Can you believe this, Haruna?
at
I
Walmart,
can't.
America's
This level
largest
just
gun
does not
seller.
want to let me go.
By the way, it might have been the world's largest. Whichever of those
It
it
just
is,
doesn't want
it
to
was
let
that
me
in the
go.
tweet, okay? But let me say here for this conversation, America's largest gun seller, you can buy an AR-15 rifle, which had been used in the very recent shooting. You can buy an AR-15 rifle, yet company policy bans the sale of pop music with curse words. That was the tweet. That tweet has no value judgment whatsoever, other than this
Can
feels
you believe this,
inconsistent. And that's not so much a value judgment as an observation of people trying to set up a sales policy. Okay?
It's like an implied value judgment, perhaps. The fact
No,
that the
I'm
tweet's
not
being
saying
made,
they
the
should or
fact that they're
shouldn't
being
sell
compared.
guns. I'm not saying the rock
16
music
plus
should or
16,
shouldn't have
22.
lyrics.
Oh,
I'm saying if you're
32.
going to have one, it's odd that you don't have the other. If you're okay with selling guns, why do you fear curse words? That's really what it is.
Sure.
And that's okay. So I'm not saying anything about curse words or guns, other than if you're worried that curse words will hurt you, why are you selling guns? If you're selling guns, why are you worried that curse words will hurt you? There is no singular interpretation of that tweet. It is a highlight of an inconsistency. Well, people ganged up on the tweet. Practically down the middle. Half said, They're a private company. If they wanted, they're not the government, so they can say that free speech only applies to government. They thought it was like a free speech First Amendment thing. In the United States Constitution, the First Amendment protects
Can't
free
you-
speech. The other
this
half
is-
said they want to sell guns. They can. It's protected by the
I
Second
wouldn't have
Amendment.
died
The other
if
half made it a Second
those
Amendment
hitboxes
thing.
weren't so fucking dumb.
Thinking I'm trying to
And if I was
defend
smarter.
either the First or the Second Amendment when I was doing neither. And that was so illuminating to me. Because what it told me was people bring their bias, they have a lens, and they use that lens
Can I play
to
better?
interpret non-biased information. They use the lens to assert that neutral information carries a bias. That's what this was mind-blowing to me. So I thought people say, "Oh, that's interesting. I never knew that." But no, people took sides. They didn't even see each other's side that was getting taken because they thought I was trying to ban guns or ban pop music when I wasn't trying to do either. Boy, that was illuminating. That was, you talk about helpful information for an educator. Yeah, there it was.
That's Twitter for you, I suppose.
I can't
Hopefully,
believe this.
A lot of social media. Twitter is at the pinnacle, of course, but yes.
Ah,
I like to
those
think
herbs
that
are so
YouTube
fucking
is a
small,
slightly
just
safer
like the
place,
dick of
but
the
I
very
suppose that we
fire.
will find out in the comment
Oh,
section for
sorry.
this podcast.
I didn't mean that.
Neil deGrasse Tyson, thank you so much for your time.
Thanks for your interest. I'm happy to
It's
share
not
it with
his
whoever will
fault.
listen. All right. Thanks.
Did you enjoy that conversation? You must have done
I'm
at least a
still
little bit if you
annoyed
made
that
it to
the
the end.
orbs are
Well, you
so
can find more
fucking
full
small.
episodes of the Within Reason podcast by clicking the link that just appeared on your screen. Or click just below it for clips from that podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you really like the content, support us on Patreon for early access, as well as to really help this podcast to grow. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.
Ingredients of life itself. You know, hydrogen is in our bodies. That was birthed in the Big Bang. And then we have carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, silicon, iron. Those elements did not come from the Big Bang, they came from stars. It's not just figuratively true, it's literally true that we are stardust.
Why does YouTube have fucking auto? Where is that? Where is the fucking... I died because of this fucking stupid soundtrack. There's no even... There is no option to turn that shit off. Insane. I should have paused my fucking game. Oh my god. Fuck this life. Oh shit.
Is there any such thing as a cult that isn't bad?
Oh, yeah, sure. There can be a group that
Fuck!
has a charismatic leader who has great power and authority, but is relatively benign. And there have been a number of
What?
cases like that. The one that I
What?
would use as an example would be Arco Sante, the organization that followed and continues to follow the teachings of the architect Paulo Soleri. His philosophy was called arcology. They had an intentional community north of Phoenix in the desert.
What?
Building Arco Sante, this experimental city. But Soleri was a relatively benign leader.
Oh my
there
God.
were later allegations regarding sexual abuse of his daughter, but that was within the family. As
There's
far as
nothing
getting
worse than this
complaints
life.
about members leaving the group, feeling they couldn't leave the group, that they were being coerced to stay, that never appeared in my work. So I
Fuck
think
this.
he was a fairly benign leader, and it was a benign organization. He's now dead, and the foundation continues.
Yeah, I think people might be surprised to hear you say something like that
What?
because when it comes to philosophy, theology, sociology, words are very difficult to define, right? Religion, cult, words like these are impossible to define precisely. But I think people would generally think that a cult involves things like resistance to anybody trying to leave. You've got your sort of charismatic leader, but there also seems to be this insular and isolated nature to that community. And I know that a lot of people in the anti-cult movement make a distinction between so-called benign cults, ones that aren't so bad, and so-called destructive cults, which are the bad ones. And
Fuck this level.
if it is that the kind of the typically bad stuff, not allowing people to leave and stuff like that, isn't intrinsic to being a cult, I think people might be a little confused about what a cult could be then.
Well, so there are three core characteristics that form what I would call the nucleus for the definition of a destructive cult.
What
Every
happened?
definition I've ever read or heard intersected on these three core characteristics, which are number one, a charismatic leader who becomes an object of worship and is the defining element and driving force of the group, typically totalitarian. And second, that leader uses identifiable thought reform techniques to gain undue influence over his or her followers. And then third, if it is a destructive cult, it does harm. And that varies by degree from group to group. Some groups are much worse than others. So you take those three core elements together. The all-powerful, charismatic leader who is worshipped by the followers.
I forgot that you don't have to press fucking anything.
Or what has been called
Uh,
brainwashing in popular culture. And then finally, that this undue influence.
Fuck this
the leader
fucking
has
blue orb.
to exploit his or her followers. And you have
Orbs are so fucking poorly aligned on this level.
In that case, if that's how we would define a destructive cult, are those first 2 points just the definition you would give for a cult, as opposed to a destructive cult? If there are non-destructive cults, what makes something just a cult?
Well, I would say that you have this all-powerful leader who is the defining element and driving force of the group. So it could be someone like Steve Jobs. It could be Elvis and his fans. It could be the group, the Grateful Dead, who had followers that were called the Deadheads. And they would go from venue to venue following this rock group across the United States as it toured. You have this, leader or a very small, let's say, triumvirate of leaders that form the basis of the charismatic leadership that defines the group, and then the group has a kind of mindset that is set in place by the leadership that defines the movement and gives the leader great influence and power. Now, if the leader is relatively benign, certainly Elvis wasn't known for creating a compound, exploiting members in any particular way, his fans. So that would be a benign group. And there have been, quite a few benign groups historically in the United States and around the world. And simply because the leader is an object of worship, is the defining element of the group, doesn't necessarily mean that the group is destructive. But
What? No!
Authoritarian leader who has no checks and balances and has totalitarian power, frequently it slides into abuse.
Yes, cult, I believe, comes from the Latin cultus, meaning worship. So certainly the worship of some kind of entity is going to be important here. But I think the thing that's going to jump out to my listeners here, I mostly
My
speak about
button is fucking
religion
wet.
and philosophy. And there's a bit of a meme almost that goes around that people say that, well, religion is basically just a big cult, and cults are basically just small religions. I can't
Fuck
quite
this
put my finger
level
on why,
with
but for
those
me it is
fucking
incredibly
misaligned,
unhelpful to
poorly
describe,
placed orbs.
Christianity as a cult, unless you're using like it in a very particular scholarly sense, like the cult of John the Baptist or something. And yet, when you describe a cult being defined as a group of people sort of organizing around a charismatic leader who has some kind of unquestionable authoritative status, things like this, some resistance to leaving, but only in the more destructive cases, sometimes benign. I think at least of like early religious movements, like the original followers of Jesus, and then Christians, Muslims today who have figures like Jesus and Muhammad, who, despite being dead,
Fuck this level.
alive by Christians and you know, still an object of not reverence, but maybe the kind of thing you're talking about by Muslims. But certainly God himself, in both of those cases, would be this kind of authoritative leader, sometimes caricatured as something like a tyrant sitting in heaven in a celestial North Korea. So what do you make of all of that, and people saying that a religion like Islam is just a big cult?
Well, I think that we need to make distinctions, and we need to look at it historically in context. And I'll be honest with you, I'm kind of tired of people saying that all religions are a cult and
Yes.
not making those distinctions.
They're just
because I
old
think
and
it just
big.
kind of is not helpful. So is it possible for a cult to evolve into a religion? Certainly. I mean, let's look at Mormonism.
Yes.
Originally, it was all about Joseph Smith. He was the defining element and driving force of the religion. He
Unlucky
was the
Victor,
one who
basically.
supposedly found these golden tablets and created the Book of Mormon and the writings on which the religion stands. Subsequent to his death,
Basically,
Brigham Young
unluckiest
took
Victor.
over. And I think arguably
If
it
I ever beat
continues
this
to be a
level,
personality
it refuses to let me do
but
so.
after Brigham Young, power began to devolve from the top down. And so now you have church government. You have the first council of the presidency of the Mormon Church, and then you have the first quorum of the 70, second quorum of the 70. The same thing happened with the Seventh-day Adventist Church. They were originally known as the Millerites. They followed a man by the name of Miller, and then
I must be
after
retarded.
his failed prophecy of the end of the world in the 1800s, they coalesced around a woman, Ellen White, who was responsible for much of their writing. But after White died, the Seventh-day Adventist Church likewise evolved and changed. And I think today it's a benign religion. It's pretty much mainstream.
Benign cult.
They still celebrate the Sabbath on Saturday as opposed to Sunday as most Christians. But they have basically moved into the mainstream. They have democratic governance and checks and balances regarding authority and power. And Jehovah's Witnesses would yet be another example.
Yes.
They started as the followers of Charles Russell. And then they followed a man by the name of Rutherford, who succeeded Russell. But then power devolved, and today the Witnesses
I cannot
are
believe
much
this.
more authoritarian than the Mormons, in my opinion, are governed by a group literally called the governing body, which is composed of about 9 men who run Jehovah's Witnesses. Now, they still, in my opinion, are a destructive authoritarian religious organization because of things like their denial of blood transfusion. And many witnesses die every year. Children die because they're not permitted to get a blood transfusion because of the group's beliefs. Also, the witnesses can be very hard when it comes to excommunicating someone or shunning them. What they call
Benign.
and they can
Oh,
shut
that's
people
pretty
up.
benign. That's not hardcore.
And then we can look at mainstream religion, and we can look at Jesus, Moses, Buddha, Muhammad. Muhammad is historically well documented. Jesus and Moses and Buddha, not so much. But based on the history that we have available,
Unluckiest
we could
Victor.
argue that
Unluckiest
maybe
Victor
when Moses
possible
was alive or Abraham,
to ever
it was
exist.
a personality-driven cult. But subsequently, it evolved, and the religion became more about the law of Moses and the beliefs than it was about any particular personality. Jesus is an interesting story because assuming that the New Testament is historical, Jesus had nothing, wanted nothing.
I wonder.
And was really the antithesis of a typical cult leader, in my opinion, because he wasn't looking for power on this earth. And it's hard to say, whether Christianity is the religion of Jesus or about Jesus, because there's so little objective history outside of the New Testament to confirm, what he taught and his philosophy. But it seems like he was the suffering servant of God, and in that sense, he was willing to suffer for his followers rather than his followers suffering for him. And when we look at things like
This is the
Sermon on
I
the
can't
Mount,
believe.
it
I
seems
can't
like
believe
he
this.
was a relatively
It's just
benign,
unbelievable.
peaceful kind of leader. The
There
same
is
could be said
nobody
of
this
Buddha.
fucking unlucky on this
So
earth.
I think that a religion can start
played
with
this
a
level.
charismatic leader, and it can be defined by that leader. But after the leader dies, how does the religion evolve? Some cults, personality cults, would just simply disintegrate after the leader dies. Others may continue. For example, Scientology has been called a cult. L. Ron Hubbard died, and interestingly, a secretary of his in his 20s, David Miscavige, who was essentially the gatekeeper for Hubbard in his declining years,
Fuck
became
me,
the
fuck me,
successor
fuck me!
on Hubbard. And I would argue that he's probably more harsh, many people say, than Hubbard was. And so rather than Scientology evolving in the direction of becoming more
Let's try to get some
benign,
new
many
bests.
people would say it's gotten worse. And I would also point out
I don't
that
have save mode
when
anymore, good.
cults accumulate great wealth and cash flow, as many have in modern history, there's a desire, a will to keep the thing going, even if it is a scheme or a scam, in order to just take over the assets and the cash flow.
I don't understand.
It's complicated, of course, by the fact that we've been talking about, say, Christianity, but a lot of cults exist sort of as a subsidiary of Christianity, like how the Jehovah's Witnesses started
I
out.
don't understand!
Called Russellites,
Oh my God.
right after
Yes.
Charles
Yeah.
Taze
Oh my
Russell,
God.
the
Oh
founder.
my god.
And yet that was still sort of a form of Christianity, although
Oh
like
my
restorationists,
God.
they thought you need to reinterpret everything. They don't believe in the Trinity, all of this kind of stuff. But today, like I know some ex-Jehovah's Witnesses, and I know people whose family won't speak to them, who knew that if they were to ever leave, they would be, their family would be instructed not to talk to them. In fact, I knew one chap who
I don't
living in the
understand!
same sort of house on a different floor with some of his family members, because there was this rule that if you live under the same roof, it's impractical to fully excommunicate, so you're still allowed to communicate with them. And this guy wanted to move out, he was married, he had kids, he wanted to leave, but he knew that the moment he left that particular building and
Too
went and lived
fast,
somewhere else,
too
his family would never
fast.
speak to him again. And so people like that will say to me, like, yeah, it's a cult. I mean, it's definitely a cult. I suppose it seems like what you're saying is that because it lacks specifically the charismatic leader now, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but would you say therefore something like the Jehovah's Witnesses probably best isn't characterized as a cult for that reason?
We might call a group a destructive authoritarian organization or religious organization. Keep in mind that many cults have nothing to do with religion. Keith Raniere, who led Nexium, which was supposedly a self-improvement seminar-selling company, that wasn't a religion. It was incorporated as a business, and Raniere was, and I testified in his criminal trial.
Why are you doing this dumb
in my
stuff?
opinion, one of the most destructive cult leaders in recent times. Another example would be Synanon, the
This
drug
is 26, I
rehabilitation
bet.
community in California
25.
that was
Let's change the
started
color.
by Charles Diedrich.
What song is
Diedrich
there?
didn't create a religion, it was a rehabilitation community that some people would argue initially was beneficial but went off the rails. So there are groups that have no religious basis whatsoever the single most salient feature of a destructive cult is the all-powerful leader. And this is a leader who is determining,
Oh, wait.
depending on the group, virtually everything and anything regarding the members of the group. So whatever the leader says is right, whatever the leader says is wrong is wrong. And the leader engenders dependency upon him to make value judgments for you. And in my experience, the leader typically believes, because the leaders I've encountered are deeply narcissistic, that everyone should think like them, be like them, and that they are in fact the prototype for perfection of human existence. And so what you have in many of these groups is the leader instituting a system to clone himself. And when you consider that many of the cult leaders that we can talk about, like Keith Raniere, David Koresh, Charlie Manson, Jim Jones, have been called psychopaths, you see that what they're doing is cloning people to be crazy
You
like
gotta
them.
be fucking kidding me.
And that's what frequently happens, is that people begin to lose their sense of self, their ability to function autonomously and independently and think critically, and that the leader essentially thinks for them. So that is what goes on in cult, and all of the major religious organizations, be it Judaism, Christianity, Buddhism, Hinduism, the Islam, have groups that I would call splinter groups that have broken away from them, and typically
Oh my god.
test of a leader who doesn't want to follow the guidance of the larger religion, but create his own subset or sect that he alone controls and is king over. And all of the major religions have these splinter groups, whether it's the Hare Krishnas with Hinduism, Shoko Asahara and Aum Shinrikyo with Buddhism, Lev Tahor, which is a breakaway group from Judaism, or groups like the People's Temple led by Jim Jones, who was an ordained Protestant minister. And we could go on and on and on. And I think it's important to point out that by taking on the facade of whether it be Christianity, Judaism, Hinduism, it gives
Stop
a
dying at
sense
the
of
end.
authority and more credibility. So if I wanted
This is
to
probably
target
top one.
Christians in the United States to join my particular group,
I
am
thought this was
going
top
to
one,
come to them
but I'm not sure anymore.
seemingly espousing Christianity, but not really. And I think the real issue and
this is
the
probably top
difference
3
between
then.
religion as we know it in the United
How much
States
do I have here?
or in the UK or in Europe or most
45.
of the world
Oh really?
is that by and large religion has checks and balances to power. They have democratic governance, or they have some kind of accountability for their leader. Pope Leo was just elected Pope, and he went through a process to get to that place where he could even be
And
considered.
this is nice.
And there were checks and balances along the way. Now, no doubt we can find fault with the system, but in a destructive cult, there's nothing there. There's just simply the leader, an absolute dictator with no checks and balances whatsoever. And so I think when we say that all religion is a cult, we're really denigrating the clear and historical definition of what a cult is, and we're also, in a sense, dismissing the difference between a destructive cult and mainstream religion. And there are distinct differences.
We'll get back to Rick in just a moment, but first,
The difference is that since when we're talking about cults, the leader is usually alive, and so the belief is stronger. That's why people are more authoritarian, because they believe And in case of Christianity, nobody really fucking cares about Christianity. And I'm talking about the believers. They don't care about the Bible. How many Christians have even read the Bible? The number must be very fucking low. Well, if you ask how many % of the Mormons have read their stupid book, like everyone's gonna say that they've read it. And that's why they care more. The smaller the group is, the more they care. And the newer it is, the more they care. Religion is old. It's debunked billions of times. But have Mormonism been debunked? Yes. But not so much. Because few people care. That's pretty much it. And when the cults are even smaller, there's much less information you can find that debunks them or ridicules them. And again, the leader is alive and belief is stronger, and so it's all more authoritarian. So yes, religion is a big, outdated cult, members of which do not really fucking care. If that's enough for you to not call it a cult, but a religion, fine.
First, most of you are aware of just how susceptible people can be to bias in sourcing their information, especially in the digital age. It can be difficult to know who
Thank
to
you,
trust.
but
To what extent do you think these charismatic leaders who engage in manipulative tactics and essentially brainwashing, ultimate authority, of course this will vary from person to person, but do you think more of this, psychologically speaking, is people just trying to exert power, trying to have influence, trying to get sex, trying to get money, and knowing that it's all nonsense and just like making something up for the sake of control, versus how much you think it is people genuinely deluded into thinking that they actually are, you know, the Messiah, unalterable authority? I'm thinking of, for example, Sun Myung Moon, the founder of the Unification Church, or the Moonies, as they are sometimes
maybe
known,
this is not top
who
3
I
but
think,
top
from
4.
reading your book, if I remember rightly, claimed to have like met in the spiritual world with like Karl Marx and Jesus and like Lenin or a bunch of other people like in the spirit world, and they all just and God, of course,
No,
and
this
they
one
all
is
decide
already
to sort of
read.
give him the spiritual authority, and he takes out like 30 advertisements in newspapers across America to let people know that this meeting took place. I'm looking at someone like that thinking, does he really believe that he is the Messiah, or is he just trying to string people along for a scam? What do you think's going on?
I think that he's dead now.
Too
He
dark.
lived into his 90s, and his family now is reportedly worth over $1 billion. And at one point, they controlled 1/3 of the American fishing fleet, and about 50% of the wholesale sushi business in
Yeah, more like
major
that.
metropolitan areas in the U.S. And he built all these businesses on the basis of cheap, low-cost labor, frequently provided by his followers, who he did not really compensate very well. I've talked to many of them. There's a book written, In the Shadow of the Moons, by Nansuk Kun. She was Moon's daughter-in-law, married to one of his sons. Moon wasn't a very good father. One son was a drug addict, another died in a one-car collision, perhaps due to being intoxicated.
How did I consider
Yet
this fucking
another
easy?
son jumped from a high-rise hotel
is
and
not.
killed himself. So the Unification Church
This might be
is
like-
predicated on the idea
This
that
is 2
Moon
then.
is the perfect parent,
This
the
might be
perfect
3.
father. Hardly that. And I don't think he really believed that he was. I think he was a very arrogant, egotistical man, very deeply narcissistic, as most cult leaders are. But I think that there's pretty much a knowingness concerning the con game that cult leaders play. And I think Moon probably understood that. Did he get full of himself? Did he feel that he could get away with anything? Maybe. L. Ron Hubbard, did he
You
really
really-
believe the Xenu story about spaceships from outer space being directly linked to the human condition through a kind of residue of ghosts of aliens that are clinging
What?
to our bodies, called body thetans? I find it hard to believe that Hubbard really believed that. I think that he created that myth. He was a sci-fi writer before he was a so-called cult leader. And I think that many of these leaders, and I've met them face to face, Keith Raniere, I would sit with him and deal with him through court-ordered mediation. He sued me for 14 years in a lawsuit that went on and on and on, and was finally dismissed not long before he was arrested and ultimately convicted of multiple crimes. He's now serving over 100-year sentence. But I didn't think that Keith Raniere really believed his own hype based on the way that he interacted with me. And I think many cult leaders are little more than con men.
Oh,
And the difference between a
this is
con
not too
man and
hard.
a cult leader
Zoink's
is
way.
that a con man typically runs their scam, takes the money, and they run. They skip town. A cult leader will run the same scheme on the same people indefinitely. And yes, they do it for power, for money, for sexual favors. And many of them have almost a symbiotic relationship, it seems to me, with their followers, feeding their ego. And that they need that adulation, they need that sense of power and control to just basically keep going. It's what
Oh,
pumps through their bloodstream. It's what they need.
no! Alright.
So you came face to face with
60.
Keith Raniere, is his name?
Yes.
So what kind of cult did he run? You said
Gonna
that
do it
you
again.
came face to face with him because he was suing you, presumably because of some critical activity you were engaged with. But what I'm really interested in, after explaining that, is what it was like to come face to face with one of these charismatic leaders, and whether you could see just why his cult was successful.
Well, Keith Raniere was underwhelming, to say the least. I mean, he looks kind of like one of those garden gnomes
Not bad.
that you might see in someone's backyard. Not a very impressive figure. Poorly put. He didn't dress very well. He didn't present very well. And I would call him
You're the
a
best.
covert narcissist. And someone who is
Alright, that's
introverted but
interesting.
deeply narcissistic, and so they seem subdued. They seem more quiet,
Why the fuck?
less of a braggart, a person that's really loud and boisterous, or what we would call an overt
I don't want to play
narcissist.
this.
So he really kind of tried to project the image of this kind of absent-minded professor, philosopher king, kind of quiet. But he also might be called a dark empath, which means that though as a narcissist and many people would call him a psychopath, he lacked the ability to have genuine empathy or even sympathy. He had the ability, and this was where he was a savant, to identify the vulnerabilities of people and then drill
Sounds like me.
into those cracks and leverage them for control. So he could figure
Fuck.
out, and he devised a system through Nexium in which he would question people constantly through coaches that he had assembled, and that he would find out what is your pain, what is your vulnerability, what is it that you feel you need more than anything else. And with that information, he was able to manipulate people. And what Nexium supposedly was about, which was the group that he created, which when I first came across it, it was called Executive Success Programs, or ESP. And the people that were part of it were called espions. And Raniere was given the title of Vanguard to denote that he was like on the cutting edge of what the world needed. The
What
technology, he would
happened?
say. The philosophy, which he called rational
Oh, I know
inquiry,
what happened.
that he
Yeah.
marketed and sold through seminars that cost a great deal of money.
No, I
And
don't.
then you had
Don't
people
worry about that.
moving to
It's
Albany,
fine.
New York, to be near him because Ranieri lived there. So there
Just
were hundreds
help
of
me
people
beat
involved in
Stupid
various
Circles
activities in the
66B.
group. They would eventually put
So that's
seminar
nothing.
put thousands of people through seminar training, including
Fuck.
2 children of past presidents of Mexico and 2 heiresses to the Seagram's liquor
Maybe that was
fortune,
even me who
Claire
failed.
Bronfman
We
and
can tell.
sister Sarah Bronfman.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Each of them worth hundreds of millions of dollars. And
Fuck.
Keith Raniere would eventually get reportedly over 100 million from those 2 Bronfman sisters, and millions more from other wealthy, successful people, celebrities, some of them, that became part of Nexium. But as Raniere became more and more powerful and he had more and more control, he became really depraved. He created
I
a
can't
kind
believe this.
of cult within his cult that was called Das. And these were women that were his sexual slaves. And he would eventually have them branded, having a doctor using a cauterizing iron to engrave a brand on their pelvis to denote their involvement with this group, DOS.
Epic.
And it turned out to be not very well disguised initials of Keith Raniere. And so he was convicted for sex trafficking and financial fraud and
Wanna
numerous things,
die.
racketeering, and he's now serving over a 100-year sentence. But it escalated over a period of time. The more power that he garnered, the more he wanted. And for him, the sex wasn't really so much, I think, about his sexual needs. It was about power and control and dominating the women
Definitely.
that he tortured and abused.
Thinking about those victims of cults, and thinking about victims of cults more generally, a question that comes to mind for me is that I think a lot of people are suspicious of their own ability to be susceptible to cults, and I think one important bit of advocacy that anti-cult activists will do is to remind people that everybody is susceptible to this kind of stuff in the right conditions. But having said that, are there like predictive factors as to the kinds of people or the kinds of communities or kinds of upbringings and stuff like that
Why?
of higher likelihood to be susceptible to joining a cult, or is it basically random, contingent on chance?
Well, I think there's one narrative that I think pulls through many of the people that
I could have basically
worked with and talked to that have been victimized by destructive cults.
I could have basically
And that
beaten
is
this
that perhaps
300
they were
years
at
ago.
a difficult time in their life.
300
And
attempts ago.
they were being bothered by something. Their job, family issues, divorce, maybe they had a relationship that fell apart, they were in school and they were struggling, they had financial difficulties. Whatever that would be, along comes someone, typically someone you know, who's an old friend, a co-worker, maybe a relative or a romantic interest, and they tell you, gee, I know you're hurting, and I know of an organization that has something to offer that can help you. And that's how many people initially become involved. And in the process of recruitment, there's so much deception. I would call it like a bait and switch con. You have no clue what you're really getting involved in, and they deliberately don't tell you. And that's the difference between thought reform and religious indoctrination. I'm Jewish, and I grew up being indoctrinated into the religion of Judaism. And
why do you need those spikes?
for my training for what we call bar mitzvah, which is what happens when you're 13 and you go up in front of the congregation read from what we call the Torah or the 10 books of Moses, I always knew what I was involved with. My parents knew what they were involved with. We were in a very liberal denomination of Judaism called the Union for Reform Judaism. And so there was no deception involved, and we understood what we were getting involved in. The same thing with a Jesuit or a woman who would want to become a sister of charity, Mother Teresa's sect within Catholicism. So you know what you're getting involved with. They tell you up front. You know what the demands are going to be. They tell you up front. And you submit yourself to it willingly because that's what you want. That is so different from a destructive cult using thought reform. They do not tell you what their expectations ultimately are, what their demands are going to be, and you really do not make a choice based on informed consent for what you're getting pulled into. And the person you trust, who probably is a true believer, who brought you in thinking that it was the best thing for you, they're also not going to be completely transparent about everything in the group. So you are brought in, and then it's a kind of spoon-feeding process of increments as you submerge deeper and deeper into the group. And then clicks in the social isolation that most often happens to various degrees, depending on how extreme the group is. But you essentially become enveloped in a kind of echo chamber or bubble in which you are not getting accurate feedback. And instead, other members of the group are constantly reinforcing the group's beliefs and demands. And so you are essentially,
If only I could do the transition.
information is being controlled and feedback is being filtered, and you are not getting the true picture. And that's by design. That's deliberate. And so it's very different from religious indoctrination, where everything is laid on the table. Do you want to be a Catholic? Go to the catechisms. Do you want to be a Jew? Go to Hebrew school and be confirmed.
Yeah, because religions are more persuasive because they're big. And because they don't really need followers. They have a lot. That's why they don't have to be extreme.
Everything is upfront, as opposed to being withheld and being micromanaged in the way it is within destructive cults.
A lot of shit is withheld with religion. When you get indoctrinated, they tell you how good God is. They never tell you that God commanded to go and kill all the Amalekites. Even animals there. And so on. They will never tell you that.
What jumps out at me from that then is the idea that people are essentially fooled into joining these cults. No one intentionally joins a cult, right? But the extent to which these cults then prey on the cult members and completely eliminate their communication with the outside world, completely reshape the way that they're thinking. Something that struck me from your book was talking about the Charles Manson murders and how some of the followers of Charles Manson commit some of these gruesome murders and are still in prison for it today. And there was one woman in particular, I can't remember her name, but who's still in prison as far as I know, and she's been there for however many decades it's been, and is repeatedly denied parole because she's committed this gruesome murder. But now she sort of looks back and says, you know, and you write about this, about her sort of saying, like, I was completely stripped of my humanity. I would have done anything. I sort of totally lost sight of myself. And now has kind of been brought around to seeing that she was in a cult, but she's still responsible for these crimes. So she's applying for parole and getting denied. And on the one hand, I'm thinking, she's a victim of essentially brainwashing. It's not her fault. She should get to go free. But on the other hand, I think, but she did commit these murders, and to some degree you could say that about anybody who's a murderer. Maybe it's their upbringing or socio-economic factors that led to it. And so I don't know, like in a case like
Fuck.
that, where it's a bit more of a grey area, do you still consider these people to be victims? And do you think that should meaningfully impact the way we view their guilt for crimes like these?
Well, look, I think you're talking about Leslie Van Houten. She was a cheerleader, I think. She was from a middle-class family in Los Angeles. There was nothing in her history that would be a red flag saying this is going to become, this person is going to become a cult member and a murderer. But that's what happened. Leslie Van Houten was a teenager when she entered into the Manson family, as it was called. And Manson, by all accounts, a psychopath, someone who basically grew up in juvenile facilities, the prison system, came out of prison and started to manipulate people and dominate people. He was in his 30s, and he collected these very impressionable young people around him, including Leslie Van Houten. And she would eventually kill, in the Tate LaBianca murders, she stabbed Mrs. LaBianca, I think, 26 times. It was a horrific, brutal murder. And it shocked Los Angeles in the late 60s. And so that became, she was originally sentenced to death. And then ultimately, she did get but she spent, what?
I just can't focus.
Locked up in prison.
I'm too fed up with the level. I was supposed to beat it
From the extended amount of the
an
LaBianca
hour and a half of playtime ago.
and I had written and spoken about.
I just
Leslie Van
can't
Houten.
care.
Pointed out that before she met Charlie Manson, she was not a criminal. She was not in trouble. There was nothing there to indicate that this would
I
be
just can't care.
her ultimate lot in life. And then during the time in prison, when Charlie Manson was no longer able to influence her, she went on, she became a college graduate, she counseled other women prisoners. She was not a violent prisoner, she was not, she was seen as essentially a model prisoner. So the Manson cult was an anomaly in her life. It represented this one space of time where she was completely different than she was before or after. And I would attribute that to the influence of Charlie Manson. But when one of the LaBianca family called me up, what they
Fuck
said to me is,
this.
they said, Leslie Van Houten was originally sentenced to death. And then when California at one point abolished the death penalty, that sentence was commuted and she was sentenced to life in prison. I don't think this member of the LaBianca family said to me that she should ever get out, because my family has suffered so horribly that there's no way that we can ever be made whole. There's no way that these family members can ever be returned to us, and they're dead. They will never have another chance. And so she was vehemently opposed, the woman who spoke to me, to Leslie Van Houten's parole. And I think there is a line where cult members cross into criminal activity where they are punished. And in some situations where it involves horrible crimes like murder or horrible sexual abuse of children or adults, it's reasonable to think that they should be punished. But I recognize that they have diminished capacity. That is, that they were under undue influence.
No!
Have committed
What?
crime if they were not under that type of control.
It's a really unique.
I will tell you what. I felt that I was going to fail. I don't know why, but I felt it. About 300 milliseconds before this happened. I just felt it. Why? waffles. Момент, чё нахуй творишь? Fuck.
Kind of case, because I'm sure the law is filled with examples of people being literally coerced into committing crimes, or people who plead insanity, but it's a sort of midway case here with cults, and I'm not sure how long it has been that people have really been aware
Fuck
of,
you.
of cults as like a phenomenon taken seriously. And so I suppose people are still kind of working it out, but I think it raises a big sort of moral question mark. I mean, I'm tempted to say like in prison, but maybe it should be like a factor in the sentencing, you know, some kind of inhibiting factor. But I can totally imagine why a victim of a family member of the victim wouldn't see it that way. It does make me wonder then, as well, since you mentioned that Charles Manson's cult was incredibly small, and we've talked about a group like the Moonies, who were absolutely massive. I don't know exactly how big they were, but a huge organisation. Of the two, the sort of really small, tight-knit cults, who I suppose could be like more isolated, that there are less members to keep up the status quo, versus these huge organisations which cannot keep track of...
What? Well, this is invisible. Everything is fucking blurry.
Of those two, which do you think
You cannot tell me it's
is the more
not.
dangerous kind of cult? The big ones or the little ones?
Well, it really depends on the leader. The leader is the defining element and driving force of the group. So as the leader goes, so goes the group. And even though a group could be quite large, the way in which the pyramid scheme of authority is built, there are all these levels of authority that are ultimately being dictated to by the leader at the top, and there are mandated ways of dealing with others in the group that the leader determines and that are implemented systematically. So you have groups like the Children of God, led by a man by the name of Moses David Berg,
First death
who was a
like
pedophile,
this.
a predator who raped his own daughter,
Let me pin the level.
and mandated that members in the group have sex with children. And so in the group, there were children that were being raped at the age of 4, and these children,
Fucking
needless to say,
sick.
grew up in a very tortured, very difficult existence. And Berg was really kind of a shadowy figure that was not ever present, but that the edicts that he had through his Mo letters and his authority were mandated through the systematic implementation in the group. And so all of these children suffered. And I've talked to many of them as they left the group. They were adults. The actor River Phoenix and his brother Joaquin Phoenix, their family was in the Children of God. And many of the children that come out of the group come out with very conflicted feelings about what happened to them. You know, they loved their parents, and yet their parents were part of their pain because their parents either allowed sexual abuse to occur or were part of it, and the children were hurt. So they have this love-hate kind of relationship frequently with their parents. An example, though, to point out is Jim Jones.
Oh my
Jim
god.
Jones, at one time, had a very
This shit is insane.
called the People's Church. They had thousands of people going
Anyways.
to church services, and they were considered by many to
Should have
be
bitten it
a
for
very
100
dynamic,
attempts ago.
very positive
No, actually,
church because they had
300.
programs to help the elderly,
300
to
and
rehabilitate drug addicts, and so on.
44.
And
Yes.
so they were seen as a
344 attempts ago.
a social action kind of church. And Jim Jones was seen as a mover and shaker in the San Francisco Bay Area. He was at one time very
Anyways.
friendly with the governor of
How
California,
long have I been
the head
fucking
of the
playing
state
for? I don't know.
assembly. He was kind of a local celebrity. But
mean,
as his power grew, and it was unchecked,
I fucking
and that
cry.
was the problem, was they did not have a system of democratic governance to check and balance Jim Jones. And he was a deeply disturbed personality. Many would say a psychopath. He also had substance abuse problems. So as he deteriorated and became worse and worse, so did the organization that he headed. And this is the dilemma or formula for disaster in cult groups, which is they are so firmly attached to the leader that as
maybe
the
one day.
leader loses his ability to make rational judgments and becomes more and more crazy, if you will, the group becomes crazy. So what happened with Jim Jones was he got worse and worse until eventually the media exposed him and he left California with more than 1,000 of his most loyal followers, and they went to English-speaking Guyana, where they created a cult compound in the middle of the jungle, which became known as Jonestown. And it was there in 1978, under government scrutiny, that Jim Jones decided to pull the plug. And he wanted to die, and he took all of his followers with him. They were either murdered or
The transition is
coerced
terrible. Wait,
to
I know
commit
what I gotta do.
suicide. And 900 people died, about 300 children. So this is the formula for disaster. You have an entire organization that is wholly dependent on the sanity of its leader.
Such the...
And when that leader is a psychopath,
They don't even need
a
that.
malignant narcissist, the possibilities are that even if that leader isn't really bad comparatively at one point, without any checks or balances to his power, he might run off the rails. And that's what we see over and over again in cult tragedies.
If I'm not
Well,
mistaken,
right.
An investigation into Jonestown
How many new attempts do I have?
commissioned by the US government. So they sent a congressman to Jonestown to check it out. And while he was there, some of the members were like handing him notes saying like, I want to get out of here. And I don't know the exact details of what happened next, but it wasn't pretty.
Yeah, well, that was Leo J. Ryan. He was the congressman from that district that included the People's Temple, and many of his constituents were coming to him and saying, you know, my family member is in Guyana and I can't get them on the phone. There were no phones. There was no communication. There was no newspaper, no radios. Jim Jones controlled all information and communication, which is a scenario you see that plays out in many cult groups. The more extreme the group, the more extreme the control to enforce what the leader wants. And so the people that lived in Jonestown were unable to
Oh my God, no,
communicate with
again.
their families
Alright,
in California. So Leo J. Ryan went with
For
the
now.
agreement of Jim Jones
Oh
on a
my
fact-finding
God.
trip to see what was happening with these people who overwhelmingly were from his district or
How
from
much stars have
California.
I?
And when he went there,
Have I
of
grinded?
course, there were
7,
people passing
8,
notes, take
that
me
is
with you, help me,
15.
save me. And when Ryan
15,
left,
19,
he left with some of
25,
the people from Jonestown.
34,
And so Jim Jones knew that when
42.
they left,
Alright.
they would tell what was really going on inside Jonestown, which was that Jim Jones had his own prison, he had his own police force, and he was ruthlessly
Let's try Wave Girl.
totalitarian and controlling of all the people in there. And he was sexually exploiting some. So that, he didn't want that truth to be known. And so he decided to kill Leo J. Ryan and the people that were trying to leave. And Ryan was assassinated. He was murdered. And I think after that, even though Jones was in a very, strange, kind of bizarre, fantasy, conspiracy-driven state of mind, he had the presence of mind to know it was over.
Stop!
And that the authorities would eventually come to arrest him, as they were from Georgetown in Guyana. And so he infamously mixed what they called the Kool-Aid, which was a Flavor Aid punch, with cyanide and barbiturates. and that was given to hundreds of people. The children had no choice. They were given poison by either their parents or by adults, and they were murdered. And then there were people that tried to escape. They were forced to take the poison. There were people that were shot. So it wasn't simply a mass suicide. It was, by and large, murder. And Jones had determined that I'm going to die, and therefore you could see it as almost like this incredible act of narcissism. Without me, you are nothing. And therefore you must all die with me, because what will you be without me? And so they all died, and 918 people.
Do we know what he actually said? Because presumably he didn't say to his followers, like, the game's up, the police are coming for us, it's time to get out of here. He must have said something a little more dramatic, a bit more narrative. Do we know what the actual message was before they all died?
I'm done.
Yes, he told them that this was an act of revolutionary suicide in response to a cruel world that didn't understand their truth, that resisted their sense of social
そうです
justice,
か。
that they were making a statement that
Why is it so
the
late,
world
Aruna?
would note
どうして
that the world was so unjust, and as many cult leaders have said, whenever there are situations where they're being held accountable
Yeah, we
for their
forgot to
behavior,
set an alarm.
this is persecution. We are being persecuted.
Too bad.
Not I am being held accountable for my behavior, but we are being persecuted, and therefore we will commit revolutionary suicide in order to make a statement. And that's what they believed. The followers of Marshall Applewhite, a very small group called Heaven's Gate, that they all
Alex,
died,
2003.
39 of them,
Are you a girl?
in California in the 90s. They were told by their
Probably
leader,
not.
who had been in and out of mental institutions and also considered a psychopath, that they were going to ascend to a level above human by shedding their earthly containers, meaning their bodies. So the leader, Marshall Applewhite, a deeply troubled individual who controlled everything in this small group, convinced them that the way for them to evolve as human beings was to shed their bodily containers. So they
What
took
the
a
fuck do you need
concoction
those
of,
coins for? They distract the
phenobarbital.
the
They
fuck
went to
out of me.
sleep. Most of them were suffocated with plastic bags over their heads. One, I think the final person that was left, inflicted a gunshot wound and died. So that was the way that Heaven's Gate ended. But I don't think any of them at the time
Bad deco.
were thinking, I'm killing myself. They were thinking something idealistic, something that was consistent with the group's philosophy. And that was the way in which Applewhite controlled them to death.
Oh, that is...
And
that shit can kill you.
this is what's so sad about so many of these groups, is that the members believe that
No
they're
way.
doing something idealistic, they're doing something positive, when in fact they aren't.
Safe mode.
Given how depressing
Anyways.
this reality is, that sounds quite dramatic, but as we said earlier, it's surprising how susceptible people are to getting to that point. And if you think that you're not the kind of person that could fall for a cult, that probably means you're all the more likely to fall for a cult because you're less likely to see it coming. I suppose what I want to ask you is a question I'm sure you get asked quite a lot, which is like, if you're worried about like a friend who's hanging out with a new group of people and you're not really sure what's going on there, what are some of the red flags you should look out for? Not necessarily for like a cult for you yourself, but like behaviors of someone you know that might indicate that they're getting into something a little bit dodgy.
They're becoming isolated, social isolation, that increasingly you're not hearing from them, they're not communicating. They seem to be submerged in this new group they're involved in, to the exclusion of family and old friends. That when you ask them about the group, they go on and on about the leader, and it seems like the leader is perfect, that the leader can do no wrong. And
So
when you
no thanks
ask them
God that should
about,
exist.
you know, anything that might
6-star.
imply there might be a problem
48,
with the
I guess,
group
today,
or
or
a
what?
question about something that they're
Yeah,
doing,
probably.
that the response is uniformly that the group can do no wrong, that the leader is always right, and that there's this total intolerance for any type of critique, and that those who criticize the group are always wrong or even evil, and that there's no legitimate reason to leave. That when you ask about people, are there people that have left your group? Are there people that have moved on to a different church or organization? They're stigmatized. They're vilified, and the narrative is there really is no legitimate reason to leave. And many of these groups have troubled histories, so you can use AI or you can use Google and search down their historical information, and you can find it online, and you can see that there's a pattern of grievances about the group that are consistent, that the same kind of problems happen over and over again, which means that this group has a troubled
Don't do
history,
this.
and that there are people that have been hurt.
We've spoken about historical cults, speaking a lot in the past tense, or we talk in the present tense about sort of borderline
No, I
cases
still
like
have save mode,
strange religious
so I got
groups. But
62.
are there still
You
today
don't
any
need,
like
you
well-known
don't do this.
cults
You don't do
that
this.
like
No.
you can point to
You do
as
2 equal clicks.
immediate red
You go
flags if you hear a
like-
particular organization or
go
whatnot?
like
I think if people were asked to name a cult today, they might struggle outside of saying things like Scientology.
So
Well,
62.
in my opinion, Falun Gong, which is the group behind the Shenyun dance company, is a deeply troubled organization that has been called a cult many times. Its leader is a guy that is called Master Li, and they believe that he has supernatural powers, that he can become invisible, and that the truth of the universe is channeled through him. And so Falun Gong is not simply some type of traditional Chinese organization, nor is the Shenyun Dance Company or the Epoch Times or Epoch Times newspaper that is also controlled by Falun Gong just any newspaper. So that would be one example. Another example would be, of course, Scientology, which is still very much present in the world.
No, don't
And
do
then
this.
there are groups like the Unification Church that have not ceased to be, that are still very much in recruiting and active today. And what I would say is that the way that groups recruit has changed. So what has happened is they are now online. So virtually anyone with a smartphone can be targeted by a group. That they are streaming their indoctrination, that they have videos on platforms like YouTube,
Oops.
that they are on TikTok, X,
No, anyways.
Twitter, Facebook. They have groups on Facebook that meet online, and that the way in which they fundraise, they receive money through PayPal, through Venmo. So the way in which a cult is created, the way in which it recruits, the way in which it extracts money from people has changed. The internet has changed all of that, so that minor children, and this is coming out more and more. There was a series called Adolescence that I'm sure that you're aware of, that brought out the fact that teenagers, kids, minor children can be influenced by online influencers, whether it be the incel, intentional celibate movement, or some other misogynistic type of organization that will
What?
encourage, this kind of hypermasculinity that culminates
You can
in
just spam, like,
altercations
difference
and
between-
at times violence. And
No.
likewise, radicalized
Or if it's one more.
groups will
My hands still
recruit online.
haven't.
For example, Hamas has recruited online, and other terrorist organizations. So cults increasingly are starting
Doing this
online
together.
and proliferating online. And in that sense, there are so many groups, it's impossible to keep up with them. One group recently was exposed called Twin Flames, that there was a documentary done. And this was a group that has been called a cult, led by two people. They recruit online, they interact online, then they have their offline group meetings, seminars, etc. But the premise of the group was that they will find your true spiritual partner for you. They will find the person that you are meant to be with. And this became very manipulative, very destructive, when women were told that they needed to become a man in
Right.
order to find their perfect partner, which would be another woman in the group. And this really became very destructive, because women who otherwise would never have considered this were being coerced by the leaders of the group, according to former members that have left, to change their sexual identity. So again and again, what we see are these groups are pernicious, and that they expand in whatever medium they can. And given the internet today and social media platforms, it's much easier for them to find people and recruit them than ever before.
It also makes it sort of vaguer to me. I mean, thinking about adolescence, for example, I think they name Andrew Tate, maybe his brother Tristan Tate. These are the sort of big names of the kind of movement that we're talking about, this whole manosphere type thing. And a lot of people look at guys like that and see them as essentially a kind of cult leader. And there is a sense in which everything they're saying makes sense. It's almost as if they can do no wrong. They can say essentially anything and they'll have people lapping it up. But it doesn't have the organization. It doesn't have, I mean, I think they have like online courses and stuff, and God knows what actually goes on behind that paywall or whatever. There is this idea, this element of, you know, exploiting people for financial gain, selling products, that kind of stuff. But at the same time, it sort of doesn't feel like there's a proactive encouraging of like shunning and disfellowshipping, the kind of thing that you see in more organized cults. So when somebody describes something like the movement you've just been talking about, this sort of online, nebulous, manosphere, masculinity type stuff, as cult-like,
Oh,
do you think that's appropriate? Or do you think this stuff is more in line with
what?
what we were talking about earlier as cults, or more like this sort of more nebulous religion or that kind of thing? Like, where do you think that kind of thing fits into this definitional paradigm?
Well, I think Andrew Tate is right there on the line. I mean, he is currently facing criminal charges, and there are allegations that offline he was presiding
Good for
over a
you.
cult-like group of people that lived together, and that he was exploiting women and so on, and that he is this kind of driving force, defining element of his following, and that they worship him in the sense that they see him as iconic, they see him as the prototype of what they wish to become. And so he is being criticized as being a cult-like leader or a cult leader, and these are the allegations that surround him. And I think it's really important for us to recognize that cults are, they're
No, I
not
need
all
save
the
mode.
same. So if we say the word cult, or we say destructive cult, that doesn't mean that they are all equally destructive. So there are many cult leaders that are simply happy to make a lot of money and have low-cost labor of their followers and become very rich, as many of them do. And they don't sexually abuse their followers. They don't physically abuse people. They operate
No.
on a continuum at a less destructive level. Now, having said that, there are cult leaders that start out at that level and then become worse. over a period of time. That was Keith Raniere's story. But there are many, many cult leaders who are simply happy to be very rich, live luxuriously, have people wait on them hand and foot, and are not planning a doomsday mass suicide or any kind of physical violence or criminal activity. And it isn't until the group crosses into criminal activity that the authorities become involved on the basis of those criminal acts. So I think it's important for us to recognize that the groups that
No, not the second time.
in murder and suicide are the very small minority of destructive cults. That the majority of them are destructive in the sense that they exploit people financially, that they inflict intentional emotional distress on people, that they cause psychological and emotional damage, that they traumatize people, and that trauma follows that individual, could be for years. Many people will leave a destructive cult without ever really unpacking what happened to them. And so they will live out the rest of their life blaming themselves, saying it was my fault, or if the group is religiously based, saying, well, I betrayed God by leaving the group, I'm a terrible person, and they've never really unpacked what happened to them. I see this over and over and over again, people self-blaming, carrying this incredible feeling of guilt and shame that they have over being involved in a cult without understanding what was done to them. I would say that people typically are tricked and then trapped in these groups, and that it is not their fault that they have been preyed upon and taken advantage of. And if they did have weaknesses and vulnerabilities that were the leverage that the leader used or the group used to manipulate them, again, it's not their fault. They're merely human to have their frailties and their weaknesses, as we all do. And that these groups are relentlessly predatory, and they take advantage of our weaknesses. And it is not the victim's fault any more than it's the fault of someone who's been raped. You hear people say, well, you know, she was asking for it. She was dressed provocatively. She was looking too sexual. And so, not surprisingly, she was raped.
I'm definitely too sexual.
Talk that way. And that,
sexy.
that has happened historically, is that people are blaming the victim. And I think that we should never blame the victim of a destructive cult, and that we should recognize who is to blame. And it's the present nature of the cult
needed. That shit scared me.
That has been preyed upon.
Oh my god.
That's when
Dumb
again
level.
I'm thinking of
Really dumb.
like the Charles Manson murderers and why that poses such an ethically difficult case, because I think what you say is quite compelling, and people will intuitively listen and go, yeah, we shouldn't blame the victims, but when you face with a case like that, it's very difficult for people to just say, oh, you know, whatever, that sort of wasn't her fault. It's complicated to say the least, but I think quite insightful here, as you said, that people who've left cults have sort of interesting psychological insights to give about how they still associate with the cults and maybe still feel like religious guilt despite having left. Maybe they sort of haven't abandoned all of the beliefs or something. But what it makes me think is how do people generally escape these cults, and where do attempts to get people out of cults go wrong? So I imagine a lot of people try it with family members and friends that they're worried about and completely and utterly fail.
Oh my god.
Where do they go wrong and where do they go right?
Well, first of all, most people will leave cults on their own, not through an intervention. And typically it will be something shocked them. They saw something happen in the group that caused them to be shocked, to feel, I can't handle this. This is too terrible. I need to leave. Or they're exhausted. They're simply exhausted. They've been working too hard. They've been
I'm dying. So boring.
They've been exhausted by the group and the demands of the group, and they feel like, I just can't go on. It's too difficult, it's too painful, and I'm going to leave. But then, because of their indoctrination in the group, they may feel that this is something that they should be ashamed of. That I should have been stronger. I should have been able to work 60 hours a week. Why couldn't I just keep doing that? I should have been able to not be in touch with my family. Why did I feel so homesick? It was a weakness.
I didn't
that
have
I
to
loved
die.
my family. I should have put God first, meaning the group, because in the mind of the individual, a higher power or a higher purpose is fused with the group in the sense that you feel that you're not deferring to the leader, you're deferring to God, you're deferring to a higher order, a higher principle. And so you feel that when you walk away, you have betrayed them. And so that's kind of the baggage that people may leave with. But typically they leave because it was too hard, it was too difficult, the group was too punitive, they saw people suffering, they saw things that happened that shocked them, and they left. Now, what will help them after they've left is to do quite a bit of study and reading and research about what is a cult, how does thought reform or coercive persuasion work, what are the mechanisms that are used to manipulate people in totalistic groups, and if they can do that, they can unwind the group programming and understand what happened to them, and in that way essentially free themselves from the guilt and the shame and get on with their life. And there are a number of books that people can read. Of course, I'm going to plug mine, Cults Inside Out, because the book not only has a history of modern cults, but it has a narrative of former cult members talking about what happened to them.
Opinions.
And what the reader will see is, even though the groups have completely different beliefs, that the same things are happening in the same way to people in various groups, despite their differences in supposed beliefs, doctrines, etc. And then also there is a chapter examining what we call cult brainwashing, which is really a synthesis of coercive persuasion, thought reform, and influence techniques, with the research notes so people can drill down and find more information. And then I describe what I do in interventions. I've done over 500 interventions across the US and internationally. I've worked in the UK, I've worked in Ireland, and I've worked across Europe. So what happens in an intervention is basically education and sharing information. And that boils down to 4 basic blocks of discussion. Number 1, defining what is a destructive cult and asking the question, does that fit the profile of the group that you are currently involved in? Number 2, what is coercive persuasion? What is thought reform? And are there parallels between the criteria that would distinguish a thought reform program and what your group is doing to you now? And then number 3, what history of the group do you not know that you should know to make a more informed decision about continuing with this group? Are they withholding information from you? Do they have secrets that they don't want you to know? Why aren't they telling you their history? Why aren't they sharing these things with you? And then finally, the 4th block, why did your family decide to do an intervention? What was it about your behavior, your choices, or your actions in recent history that caused your family so much concern that they decided to bring me in and stage this intervention? And so you go through that. It could take 3 or 4 days of discussion. And during that time, you're asking the person to not communicate with the group or people associated with the group, and to take a temporary time out to discuss what the family is concerned about and the various things that I've outlined. And then at the end, they will decide to do what they want. Some decide to return to the group. I would say about 30% of the people that I work with at the end will say, I want to go back to the group. I'm happy there. That's what I want to do. And the family will accept that. All they want is the time allotted to discuss their concerns. And then many of the people I work with will say, I'm leaving in the first day. I'm not even going to stay here for a day. So out of the 30% that I'm not effective with, many of them leave in the first day. Many of them leave early on. Some at the end. But mostly in the beginning. They just decide, I don't want to continue. Or they're in touch with someone in the group and they tell them, hey, get out of there. We don't want you to talk about these things with anyone. Come back to us. Ignore your family. Ignore their concerns. So that's how people get out through intervention. But the overwhelming majority of former cult members, they simply walked away.
It must be quite difficult to convince people to sit down for an intervention in the first place. I mean, especially the type that's likely to walk away. I mean, do you sort of... I'm imagining somebody who's sort of in a cult and it's kind of hard to get a hold of them. They're already kind of distant. You know, you're just sending a text message saying, hey, would you mind popping over so we can do a 5-day intervention where you take a break from your... Like, how do you get people into that situation?
Well, sadly, many of the families that contact me, I'm going to tell them there's nothing I can do for you. Because it does require meaningful communication, meaningful access, that things are not so far gone, either through the cult's efforts or because the family has had so many heated arguments about their family members' involvement that there's no more communication. Or if they live in a compound and there are a minority of cult members, but there are a substantial amount, they live in an intentional community or a compound with other cult members, and the family absolutely has no access. And in situations like that, I will tell the family initially, look, there's just nothing I can do.
All right,
I have a chapter in my book called Coping Strategies to coach families on how to improve communication, hopefully leading to a better place where they might be able to stage an intervention. But in most cases, there is enough communication and there is enough access that a family could stage an intervention. And so what they do is they have a designated time when I'm going to come, and when the family member is there. It could be a son, a daughter, it could be a parent with adult children initiating the intervention. It could be a spouse. So I come in as a total surprise, and we sit down, and the family will introduce me, and the family will say, look, this is what we're doing. This is why we're doing it. And what we want from you is just time.
Oh my god.
Would you be willing to give us the next 2 or 3 or 4 days, not grueling, where we talk for a while, we break, maybe we spend 7 or 8 hours a day in discussion. And then would you be willing to do that? Because we love you, we're your family, and we really feel this is important to us. And what we would like you to agree to is to just give us the time. And then you will do whatever it is that you want to do, and we will respect that. But we would like the time to
a little
talk
bit less
with you
attempt
about
or
why
not.
we're worried, why we're concerned. And usually, most of the people will say, okay, fine. You know, I don't think it's necessary. I think this group I'm in is
Oops.
great. Everything's wonderful. Some of the people will say, hey, this is maybe an opportunity for me to explain to you why you should get involved in this group and how it could help you. And the family will typically respond by saying, great, then we can have an exchange of ideas and discussion. And we brought Rick me, because I'm an expert. I testify as a court expert in court proceedings across the United States and internationally. And so I am here on the basis of my expertise to share what I know, and your family is here as eyewitnesses to what has happened, and we just want to talk things through. So in that sense, it's kind of like a drug or alcohol intervention, which typically begins as a surprise, and the family pleads with the individual to hang in there and talk things out with them. And that's eventually the format or the general structure. But what is discussed is very different, and the crucial difference with a drug or alcohol intervention is that in those interventions, the liquor store owner or the drug dealer are not trying to sabotage the intervention.
Yeah.
But the cult, given any opportunity, will try to sabotage the intervention. And that's why you want the person to agree not to be in touch with them during the days that you're having this discussion, this dialogue.
You mentioned the fact that a lot of interventions for alcoholics, for example, are surprises. You don't text them and say, hey, you just sort of, the image is walking home and all your family are sat there, like, what's going on here? What do you think about the ethics and
This
the
was
efficacy
perfect. Almost,
of
yeah, it was pretty much
involuntary
perfect.
interventions for cults?
Well, as any of your viewers can find out, I myself was involved in involuntary deprogramming or involuntary cult interventions back in the 90s. In actually 91 would have been the last involuntary intervention I did. And quite frankly, I went through legal hassles over it. The families involved went through legal hassles. And basically, it was abandoned. But in fairness, I want to say this, that the families that retained me in maybe 24 adult
Finger lock.
interventions that I did on an involuntary basis where the family hired security and they would not let the person go, were in extreme situations that involve frequently cult compounds, inability to access the person, and very extreme groups. I think it's fair to say that it could be a life or death situation. I've been involved in interventions where the group said, don't take your insulin, don't take this medication that you take to avoid convulsions. And the person could die as a result of the cult's influence. Or there were situations where children were being horribly abused, and the adult needed to leave the group in order to take their children with them. Because another aspect that we haven't discussed is that people are born into and grow up in groups called cults, where what we consider crazy and abnormal to them is everyday life, and that abuse
Alright, maybe
is
one more
the
attempt.
norm, and harsh corporal punishment, sexual exploitation, labor violations, working kids. I mean, these are the kind of things that go on, and children suffer, and some die in destructive cults. There was a group in Australia that denied a little girl, 10 years old, insulin, Elizabeth Strauss, and she died. And now the parents and other members of the group will be going to prison for their complicity in her death, that they wantonly denied her insulin, and she died a very painful death as a result of the teachings of the group and the leader of the group. So back in the 70s, the 80s, when involuntary deprogrammings were taking place, not all of them were were life or death.
FPS bug, please
But
no.
many of them, and in fact a majority of them, were with groups or organizations that there was no way to access that individual, that there was no way to do a voluntary intervention,
No
or with
suppose.
very
I got a
limited
green.
possibility of success. So that's why parents did that. But
Oh,
because
really?
of the
Look how.
legal
Look at this. It's so
complications, that
cute.
is lawsuits, criminal
You can't even die
prosecution,
here.
that form of intervention has been abandoned, and I don't
It
know
could
of
have been one
anyone that
attempt.
does it currently.
Could have been.
And I think it pretty much ended around 91, 92.
It sounds really dramatic. I mean, the idea of it's one thing to say it's a surprise versus an invitation, but for there to be security to physically not let someone leave. I mean, firstly, I'm trying to imagine like how the person or people that you were involved with in these cases reacted, and secondly, like, does it work, or are they so sort of trapped and imprisoned that they just consistently saying, "Let me the hell out of here! Like, I'm not going to listen to you."
Well, I'll tell you a case history in exactly that, which was a young woman. She was a college graduate. She had a postgraduate degree. She became involved in a very extreme group, and this group believed that the members of the group should be sterilized. And so men got vasectomies, women got tubal ligations and cauterization, so that they could not have children. The woman that I eventually would work with was 26 years old. Her family wanted her to be able to have children. They wanted her to have all the opportunities in life. They chose to do an involuntary intervention. This was in the late 80s.
Not being able to have children is blessing.
I was the deprogrammer or intervention specialist that worked with the family and with this young woman. And she became very, almost really violent,
guys.
screaming,
I don't need to save more.
chanting, did not want to listen to anything. But at the end of a period of days, there were about 5 days, she gradually changed, and she listened, and she took in the information, and eventually decided to leave the group. And years later, she sent me a card with a picture of her daughter, a baby that she had had. And I think what she was telling me was, thank you. And I'm thankful for my family because I can have a child. And there were so many people from this particular group in California that they could never have children. Even after they left the group, there were women that I appeared with
on
a news program to expose the group. And they said, you know, I finally realized that I left the group for good reasons, and it was good that I left. You know, at the time I left, it was very painful. I felt I was turning my back on God. But eventually I realized it was a cult, and that the leader was not God, and that he was demanding and unreasonable. And I left because it was the right thing to do for me and for my family, meaning parents, extended family. But that same person said, but I can never have children. I know that the group is a cult, and I won't go back, but I will never be able to have children because I have been sterilized. So those are the stakes in some of these interventions. Another woman that I worked with had a particular disease that caused extreme convulsions, and she was on a medication to obviate that, to take care of that, deal with that. And the group was telling her not to take it. The parents' fear was first that their daughter would die. And so they did an involuntary intervention, and she came out of it. She left the group. She was in touch with me. I haven't heard from her in a while, but she used to call me every now and then, and we had an ongoing joke, which was when I was working with her, at times she would drift into a kind of trance, and I wouldn't think that she was hearing me, and I would say to her,
Fuck.
hello, you know, and I would like knock on something and say, is anybody home? And she would look at me and she'd get angry and say, I'm here. And that was my way of engaging her. And she would call me on the phone over the years, and she would, when I pick up the phone and I'd say hello, and she'd say, hello, are you there? And I would always know it was her. And incidentally, I worked with Harvey Keitel on the Jane Campion film Holy Terror, which included Kate Winslet. And Harvey, I was his technical advisor, and there was a scene in Holy Smoke where he behaved in the same way. Hello, are you there? To Kate Winslet, who was the cult member. And that was from Harvey and I talking about cases that I had done.
I can't.
Wow, that's pretty cool. That's a pretty cool stamp that you've made on popular culture there. Okay, those sound actually quite successful, and it's a shame that there are so many legal complications even in these extreme cases.
No!
Most people listening to this, anybody who's thinking, gosh, I think I know somebody who's susceptible or something's going on, maybe they don't really want to stage a whole intervention, maybe they're just looking to sort of talk to their friend. Where do people go wrong, like on that level, when they try to sort of say to somebody, hey, let's have a chat about this, they sit down for an hour over coffee and they say, listen, I think you're in a cult and you need to get out. Where do they go wrong?
They're too harsh, they're too judgy,
Yeah.
they haven't figured out the best approach, which is to be calm, to be conciliatory, to say, well, what's going on with this group? Talk to me about it, or whatever. To not be threatening or confrontational or critical or negative, and to just be open and to be a good listener and to listen to them. Because quite frankly, about half the calls that I get or emails are from people where they think it's a cult and they're wrong. So the first thing that you should think is, well, maybe I'm wrong. That I think the group is a cult because maybe they're a little weird and they believe things that are somewhat strange. But as I often say, it's not about beliefs, it's about behavior. How does the group behave? How is the group structured? Can it objectively be defined as a destructive cult by virtue of the structure of its authority and the group dynamics and its behavior, not subjectively because I don't like what you believe, I don't like your doctrine.
What?
In my opinion and the way I see it, if a group has weird beliefs, so what? It's none of my business. It's only when the group is doing something that is destructive and that is hurting people that people like me become involved, or for that matter, law enforcement. So keep in mind, if somebody you think they're in a cult, you may be wrong, and you may just be overreacting. And you might need to just chill out a little bit.
Maybe people think capitalism is a cult.
I mean, come on, we've got OpenAI, we've got ChatGPT, which is not always right. A lot of times I'll ask AI something and I'll see mistakes and whatever, but we have the tools to explore the background of a particular group and find out more information about them. And it behooves you, if you care about somebody, to do the research first, not later, and find out more about what they're involved in, because you may be wrong, you may just be overreacting.
What kinds of groups, just briefly, like, do people call you up and say, I'm worried about my friend who's in a cult, but they're not actually a cult? Like, what kind of groups give people that impression?
Oh, well, Freemasonry, Wicca, nativistic kind of voodoo, Santeria, or whatever, that may be relatively benign. They don't have a dictatorial leader, they're not hurting people, but their beliefs are strange. I think that the Satanists, though their beliefs may be repugnant to people, are not causing direct harm in the way that other groups are that have been called destructive cults. So there are exceptions. You know, there recently was an online supposedly Satanist group that was targeting kids. But that's the exception, not the rule. And for the most part, I find Satanists, Wiccans, witches, Santeria and so forth to be relatively benign. And though the beliefs are strange to the mainstream, that doesn't make them a destructive cult. Likewise, there could be a kind of philosophical group or a political group that we don't agree with, that we should not label a cult simply because we don't agree with them. For example, I would not call the so-called woke movement a cult any more than I would call Donald Trump a cult leader. I think that there are groups that we disagree with, that we look at them and say, well, I don't like what your political platform is, I don't like your agenda, and therefore I want to denigrate you, and I'm going to use the word cult. Because that makes me feel like you're brainwashed if you don't think how I think. That is not really helpful. And that is not what a destructive cult is. It's not about whether they agree with your beliefs. It's about how do they behave and what are the group dynamics and how is authority exercised.
No, what is wrong with you?
Like figure who many criticize, particularly because of insistence on loyalty, surrounding himself with yes men, firing people who exhibit contradictory attitudes, and then a movement which crops up around him, which, you know, when somebody gets up and says that they're a socialist, they say, oh, you've been brainwashed by the woke media and you're not thinking straight. And again, it's kind of hard to judge because it's on such a sort of broad scale, but in the way that you just said, you know, I wouldn't say that any more than I would say Donald Trump is a cult leader, but you know, some people kind of do say that about a man like him, you know. Famously, he said he could shoot someone in New York and his followers wouldn't do anything.
Still don't have
it's
the
like,
power.
It's sort of a lot of resonance with the kind of stuff you're talking about.
Well, Trump comes across as very narcissistic and self-indulgent.
Last one.
You know, and so on,
Last one,
which
guys and
makes
girls.
him disagreeable to some people, but it doesn't make him a cult leader. I mean, there are many movie stars, actors, celebrities who are very narcissistic, who have a kind of posse or entourage that follows them, that agrees with whatever they say, that are sycophants. But that doesn't make it a cult. And what I think Donald Trump is more of a vessel than he is a cult leader. That is, that the sentiments and the grievances, the feelings of the Republican Party, the base of the Republican Party, that he identified all of them, all of the most important issues for most of the Republican Party, and he gives voice to their grievances, their sentiments, their fears in a way that that has engendered their support. And if you look at Donald Trump's history, I see him more as a salesman than a cult leader. Someone who understands his target market, and in this sense, it would be.
Are you brainwashed by Donald Trump?
The Republican base, and he understands what they want to hear, and he speaks to their deepest held feelings. And I don't think that the people that support him suddenly change their feelings or their political attitudes or their grievances, but rather it just flowed through him. And in that sense, he is more beholden to them than they are to him. I think if, for example, Donald Trump said, well, I think that we should have immigration reform, and we should have work visas for people that are harvesting crops in restaurants and hotels and in construction, because we need those people. And they should be given some leeway, a pathway to citizenship. I think immediately Donald Trump would no longer be followed
What?
by the Republican base. That they would,
Nah,
as they say, throw him under the bus.
you're wrong.
And in fact, he did a rally in Alabama at one point, and he spoke
If we're
in
talking
favor
about
of
MAGA.
vaccinations because
Not really
one of the
Republicans, although
vaccinations was produced through something called Operation Warp Speed, and that vaccination was quite effective in the COVID pandemic. And Trump said, you know, that what about that vaccination? Wasn't that great? I hope all of you are vaccinated. And he started getting booed. And in my experience, cult leaders are not booed. Cult followers are not allowed that privilege
well, that's
to
true.
boo or show discontent in that way. And instead of Trump denouncing them and saying, take all of these negative people out of here, he changed and walked back what he was saying.
Fuck.
And morphed it into an issue of, well, you know, if you don't want to take the vaccine, you shouldn't have to be forced to take the vaccine. Vaccine should not be mandated. And then the audience started to clap and then cheer. And if you watch Trump in many of these interactions at his rallies, he's playing to the crowd. He's playing to the audience. It isn't like the audience is simply obedient and subservient to him.
Maybe it
Yeah,
was
that makes
like
a lot
that
of sense, actually.
long
And
ago.
I think, again, it's probably helpful in the way that when people say, like, you know, religions are just cults. It's like, I know what you mean, but it's probably quite unhelpful to annex that kind of terminology where it doesn't properly belong. Because of the kind of work that you're doing, it will blur some of the lines and confuse the sort of information that people need to know. One other, before we wrap up here, like, there is one other specific thing I wanted to ask you about, just because, in terms of the popular understanding of cults, this random thing just sort of burst onto the internet recently, went super viral. There was this viral video of a group of people sat singing quite a strange sounding but very beautiful song in a language that most people listening didn't understand, and it looked very sort of community oriented.
Alright,
sort of
let's
sat in a
go,
room together,
please.
and it
Oh my
looked really nice.
God.
It almost looked like a family get together around a campfire or something. And upon looking into who these people were, they were part of the John from Cargo cult. What is the John from Cargo cult?
Well, you know, that is a group that is based
guess that
on,
is it.
I
Kind of feel like that is it.
I think it's isn't it the Sullivan Islands?
Opinion, maybe.
Or somewhere, islands in
It's
the
somewhere in the
Pacific.
Pacific.
Yeah,
Naruhodo.
the Solomon Islands, I believe. So it's a very isolated group that had interaction with Western countries.
Opinion not
And they
passable,
began to
not
kind of
possible,
worship this
and
man that had landed on their island and shared these great things from the West with them. And
then a
they
cripple.
began to
is that the right word?
idolize this individual who
Cripple.
came to the
I wonder.
islands, and they began to worship the things that he brought, you know, and they were called a cargo cult. But this is not a group that has an authoritarian leader today that is making demands on the people. It's more like really kind of like the Deadheads and the Grateful Dead, and the idolization of someone, and, you know, being a fan of that person and what they represent. So I think you can have what we call, you know, a cult following, which means fans, a fan base, and that's different from the type of cult that would be called a destructive cult.
Yeah, so I mean, my favorite example of a cargo cult is the so-called Prince Philip movement.
Alright guys, it's been too fucking long. I would like to finish watching this, but it's too long. I probably don't have any more space on my disk, on my hard drive. So, thank you for watching and goodbye.